Chapter 43. The Final Choice. Kaksahi roughly crashed on the battlefield coughing blood, and as he tried to regain his bearings he saw his comrades viciously trying to keep the Otsutsuki horde at bay. Nearly half of their troops had perished in the melee courtesy of the gentle fist of the Otsutsuki, but for every ninja or samurai that was killed, the Otsutsuki lost 10 of their own, including a few of their own clansmen. He roughly tried to get back up only to quickly bring his tanto forward in order to cleave off the heads of the 2 dead thralls that tried to jump over him. Chaos. It was visible all over the battlefield as the 2 sides butchered each other. His own dog Summon had fought valiantly, killing hundreds of Otsutsuki thralls before it was struck down by bloodthirsty Kaguya. The same madmen who were now charging towards him. Kakashi glanced at his limp left arm, knowing it was not just broken but most of the chakra points had been sealed off courtesy of an Otsutsuki warrior. In return, Kakashi had stabbed the woman in the throat. His chest felt heavy. Thankfully his body armor had blocked the worst of the damage one of the Otsutsuki had tried to inflict on him. It had saved his heart from exploding outright but could not stop the fracturing of at least 3 of his ribs. He was bleeding internally and his chakra was running low. Yet he charged at his enemies with nothing but courage in his heart. Ducking a strike aimed at his neck, he blocked another sword aimed at his chest before twisting himself around his first opponent only to stab the man in the balls. The Kaguya screamed but was quickly silenced with a merciless lightning strike that fried his brain. His partner brought down a vertical slash at Kakashi which the Hatake barely blocked. So powerful was the blow that it brought Kakashi to his knees. His enemy kicked him right in the throat. Kakashi gasped. The chakra-powered kick damaged his neck muscles and he struggled to breathe even as he crashed back on the bloodied ground. His vision was getting hazy as panic set in. He could barely hear his laughing enemy approaching towards him. The Kaguya stepped before him, his sword raised high in the air. Kakashi closed his eyes knowing he had done his duty towards his king as best as he could. But the blow never came. He gingerly opened his eyes to see a sword lodged right through the Kaguya's mouth from the back. As the enemy ninja crumbled, Danzo swarmed in Kakashi's vision and the Shimura heir quickly offered his hand which Kakashi accepted as he was hauled back up to his feet. "Can you still fight?" asked Danzo, even as he battled away 2 dead thralls with his sword in one reflexive strike. "Do I have a choice?" croaked Kakashi. Gods, did his throat hurt. Danzo gave a grim smile just as his summoned Baku came charging towards them. The gigantic beast crushed dozens of enemies in its path before standing before Kakashi and its master. Danzo quickly jumped atop the beast and glanced at Kakashi. They both saw Hanzo and his paltry force getting hammered from all fronts. The dead were literally throwing themselves at the salamander summon, forcing the beast back. Already it was badly injured and its master was busy facing off against 4 Otsutsuki. The men around him doing all they could to stop the unending tide. If that flank collapsed, the enemy would have a clear path towards the barrier holding the tailed beasts. "This is madness," whispered a Kunoichi. Kakashi could not help but accept his fellow comrade's assessment. Hanzo's flank was about to collapse and while Danzo's summon had forced the enemy on the left flank to retreat, they would be back again, and this time the ninjas just didn't have the numbers to hold them off. "We have to crush the enemy's right flank." Nearly every last survivor gasped in disbelief on hearing Danzo's command. Just one glance at the Shimura showed he was not joking. "Don't you see how many of them are there, Captain?" asked a shocked sand ninja. "Doesn't matter. If even one flank collapses, we are finished. If the enemy reaches the barrier, all of this would have been for nothing," barked Danzo furiously. "How the fuck do you plan on breaking through them?" questioned another furious Senju. "Alone if I have to." Danzo's summon roared without warning as the Shimura heir dashed towards Hanzo's flank. Kakashi cursed and looked at the stunned warriors around him. "I'll hold this flank. Support him and we might just survive a bit longer. Stand there like cowards and we shall all die screaming," roared Kakashi. That snapped them out of their trance and Kakashi was relieved on seeing Danzo tearing through dozens of enemy lines with the help of his summon. A moment later, a small force of 30 ninjas dashed after him while Kakashi steeled himself with the few fighters he still had as the enemy on his flank charged again. He grinned when Danzo's summon roared a wave of fire obliterating hundreds of enemy forces in one breath. Before he could relish in the small victory, Kakashi froze. A monstrous snake jumped from beneath the ground and swallowed Danzo whole. "Captain Danzo." The men following the Shimura heir felt their worst nightmare coming true. The snake was still crashing towards the ground after swallowing its prey when its body was torn apart in a blast of flesh and blood. A one-armed Danzo covered in red jumped and landed on his still charging Baku summon. "Charge!" Kakashi had always known the Shimura clan were vicious warriors, but to see Danzo never lose focus and still lead his men into enemy ranks after that shook him. The men following Danzo also shared those inspiring thoughts as they roared after their commander and fell upon the enemy forces near Hanzo's flank in a flurry of weapons and jutsu. Danzo effectively used his monstrous summon to scatter and stomp enemy forces, creating panic among their ranks, while his force immediately attacked the Otsutsuki surrounding Hanzo and the dead, hounding the salamander summon. It was one of the most maddening attacks Kakashi had ever seen in his short life. While that flank was now slowly becoming steady, Kakashi grimaced as he saw the sheer number of enemy about to fall upon his flank. He doubted he could stop them, but it was that or to give up and die. The men and women around him gulped nervously as the enemy got closer. They grouped together waiting for the massive wall of enemies to slam into them, only to be surprised when a wave of fire rained down upon the enemy's vanguard. Surprised, Kakashi looked a few feet above him and saw a large space dimension portal coming to life. The first three people that came charging outside were all dressed in armor and bore the roaring sigil of the three-headed dragon. And they were not alone. Mifune of the samurai jumped outside the portal and was followed by hundreds upon hundreds of clone forces. For the men defending the barrier, it was a miracle from the gods itself, as nearly 2,000 clone forces led by the Kingsguard and Mifune arrived to their aid. The nearest enemies could only scream in terror as they were set on fire. Shisui and Itachi together confronted one of the Otsutsuki commanders and drove their swords in the man's head and heart, thereby ending his life. Mikoto and Mifune fell upon the enemy forces with their clone army at their backs. Kakashi collapsed in relief and saw Shisui glancing at him from afar. "Thank you," he whispered, echoing the thoughts of his own followers. To his dismay, Shisui and Itachi had grim looks on their faces as they prepared themselves to crush the remaining few thousand enemy forces. It was the king. That was all they answered before leaping into the fray, and for the first time Kakashi felt hope bubble in his chest as the enemy forces started to get decimated under the skillful command of the Kingsguard. But if they were here with such a large clone force, then their king was all alone against the bulk of the enemy army and their queen. Kakashi could only hope Naruto had a few thousands clones under his command, for fighting against them all would be problematic, to say the least. But he had to have faith in his king, and with that determination, Kakashi again leapt into the battle. The light. Gods, what light it was! For several long and painful minutes, it had felt like a star had suddenly died and filled the world one last time with its illumination. When its shine finally subsided, a surprising sight awaited every surviving soul on the beach of the land of water. For the Otsutsuki queen, it was a landscape of horror. Nearly half of her forces had been charred to ashes, and the remaining were desperately scratching at their eyes as if blinded. Even the dead were screaming in pain, which was rarely seen. Most importantly, the ninja forces around the king were gone. She extended her senses and found them emerging on the other battlefield, where the allied forces were trying to detonate a massive bijou bomb. Her opponent stood before her in all his glory. His Susanoo still stood tall and strong. But it was his eye. The Byakugan of hers clearly saw his chakra reserves plummeting at a rapid level. His eye was crying rivers of blood, and she could see his body muscles tearing themselves apart to maintain that beastly Susanoo of his. She grinned. She had no need of defeating him, she just had to outlast him in battle before he eventually dropped dead with chakra exhaustion. At his current rate it wouldn't take more than 10 minutes at best. In her eyes it was still a miracle he was still standing. If she had to guess, his vision was deteriorating quite rapidly, judging from the slight twitch of his eye. "You're a fool. You might have given your men a few more moments to live, but it shall be your doom," she declared, her fist clenched, making the Kyuubi scream as it was yanked on all four as she stepped on its head. "That's the difference between us, I guess. When you choose to lead, you are responsible for the lives of those who follow you. As king, they are all my children, and it is my duty to look after them. It is my job to worry about their lives. If only you had understood this, then this war wouldn't have happened. The threat of your clan returning to Earth might be real, and you would be surprised how humanity would have rallied behind you, only if you had tried a different approach," lamented Naruto, earning a mocking laugh from her. "As if the opinion of squabbling humans matters. Your race has never seen the bigger picture, your kind is just a step above monkeys. Even those creatures are better, for they know their betters. And like the rest of your race, you too shall die," said Hinata fiercely. The king cursed as dozens of wooden tendrils sprouted from the ground and started wrapping themselves around the legs of his Susanoo. Many were burning away due to the sheer chakra they were clashing against, but many more were strangling themselves around the legs. Naruto raised the glowing form of dawn, ready to slash them away when he felt that violent pull. He could only gasp in surprise when his entire Susanoo was yanked from the ground and sent flying towards Hinata. He flinched on seeing Kurama being forced to form a Bijudama. His lone Mangekyo could already predict the seconds before that bomb would hit his Susanoo, and unlike his opponent, he couldn't absorb chakra. With a furious roar, he fought against the power pulling him and managed to make his Susanoo flap its monstrous wings, thereby taking a timely leap into the air and barely able to dodge the Bijudama, which sailed right past him, tearing across the beach and detonating into the interior of the land of water with a mighty roar. He flipped down in the air, making his monstrous Susanoo bring the power of dawn right above the Kyuubi's head. His friend would understand why he had to fight against him. Hang in there, Kurama. This will all be over soon enough. Naruto was again surprised as his regal sword met a layer of bone instead of Kurama's head. Looking around, he saw Hinata consuming large quantities of chakra from the beast and covering it with a full-blown human skeleton made of powerful bones alone. It encased the fox in a protective manner as it sprouted several bony hands from all over its hideous form. Bone release. Just like Kimimaro. Mad laughter echoed across the battlefield as the full power of the Otsutsuki Queen erupted. The Kyuubi lashed out with all 9 of his tails at once, forcing Naruto to conjure a shield of black flames in his Susanoo's only free hand. The two opponents met in a fierce clash. The king made his dragon-headed Susanoo unleash scorching flames towards 3 of the Kyuubi's tail while he swatted away another 3 with the help of Dawn. With his shield, he blocked the last 3 if barely. The fox roared in agony as several of its tails were set on fire. Naruto flinched on hearing his friend's pain, and that slight hesitation costed him as dozens of bony hands descended upon his Susanoo. He managed to block a few at the last moment, but 3 of them breached his inner defense and struck at his Susanoo's armored chest. Crack! He vomited blood and felt the sickening sound of his chest muscles being torn. The Susanoo lost a layer of its armor, and to Naruto's horror he realized he couldn't replenish it as aggressive chakra of the Otsutsuki Queen had festered the impacted area. Her energy was now slowly seeping across his Susanoo, consuming it like a hungry beast. Shinra Tensei. He was sent crashing across the ocean by the rinnegan's power, and before he could even process his new injuries, he saw a rain falling from the skies. Bone release, 1,000 slashes. Naruto hastily brought up his shield as monstrous bone fragments rained down upon him. The bone-armored Kyuubi charged at him, forming up another one of those lethal Bijudama. He dodged the attack and summoned Kamui around Kurama's legs. He closed his eyes as his friend screamed, for his legs were torn off, sending him crashing to the ground. Naruto charged forward with the help of his wings, intending to settle this quickly, but his hopes were dashed when the skeleton warrior covering his friend pointed several of its bony hands forward. Chakra receivers. Thousands of black chakra rods were unleashed towards the king. Having already seen the mighty Kyuubi be defeated and subdued by these rods was all the proof Naruto needed to stay away from every single one of these rods. But for all her power and talent, his enemy had made a critical mistake out of ignorance or arrogance. They had allowed him to choose his battlefield. Naruto raised a single finger. Water release, water wave. A small tsunami arose from the massive ocean, tearing through the entire volley of black chakra rods, but the attack didn't stop there as the king made another hand seal. Water release, 10,000 bullets. The ocean itself answered his call as the very air and sea around them transformed into an army of water bullets before suddenly attacking the bone-armored Kyuubi from every direction. Hakushu. To everyone's surprise, the monstrous creature rotated at rapid speed with its bony hands expelling a wave of chakra in all directions, battling away the assault of an army of water bullets. It left the beast open for Naruto's next attack. Water release, world of whirlpools. Hinata cursed as the ocean beneath her feet transformed into a raging whirlpool that instantly swallowed half of her bone warrior along with the Kyuubi. It would seem her opponent's prowess with water release was not exaggerated, after all. She was forced to continuously defend herself as not just water bullets but large water dragons also rose from the sea, hitting her on every side. All the while the very ocean started to swallow her monster inch by inch. Shinra Tensei. She grinned when her attack tore away every jutsu attacking her, and just in time as the Susanoo appeared behind her. With a mighty roar, she forced the Kyuubi to use its tails to strike his own friend down. Naruto blocked 2 of the tails with the flat of his sword, batted another 4 away with his Amaterasu shield before twisting the Susanoo around to stab his heavenly sword through the groin of the bone-covered warrior and the Kyuubi. He was disappointed when an entire layer of bones surrounded the spot where his sword connected, and he was barely able to make a hole a few feet wide. He realized his mistake when he sensed the chakra explosion. The Susanoo retreated backwards as an army of bone shards exploded at it in point-blank range. Naruto quickly summoned Kamui and absorbed all the projectiles before they did any lasting damage. He panted harshly, "Gods, how long had it been?" To him it already felt as if an entire hour had passed when in truth it had barely been 3 minutes. He now bitterly realized as to how someone like Hashirama could have lost against Hinata Otsutsuki. She had too much power in that body of hers, and combined that with her twin dojutsu, she was a force of death itself. She grinned as she created several bone swords and commanded not just her creature's bone hands but also every one of the Kyuubi's tails to take up each of them. A savage grin graced her lips as she eyed Naruto with a murderous grin plastered on her beautiful lips. He transformed his Amaterasu shield into a dark flaming sword and raised Dawn in his right arm. They met with another thunderous clash. His twin swords zoomed forward, cutting through air and 2 of the bone warrior's hands. Hinata had seen the attack coming with the help of her Byakugan but had not been fast enough to stop it. For a Susanoo of this size, it was dangerously fast. She willed her remaining swords to attack him from 3 sides, up, left, and right. What happened next left her speechless. The flaming dark sword twirled into the Susanoo's hands at lightning speed, cracking away each and every one of the bone hands and its bone swords. On the other hand, Dawn did the same before the swords were forced to come together in a defensive formation as the Bijou clashed its tails against them once more. Again breaking the attack, the Susanoo delivered a crushing kick towards Bone Warrior's chest, sending it crashing away. Hinata was barely able to raise her remaining 2 swords, both of which were destroyed courtesy of Dawn and the Amaterasu sword. Her scream echoed across the battlefield as the 2 holy swords buried themselves clean through the Bone Warrior's groin. It had been a mistake to challenge him in a clash of swords. He was too fast and too strong with the blades for her liking. His Susanoo opened its mouth and the dragon inside launched a fiery volley of flames. She grinned as she easily absorbed the attack and seized the opening she had been waiting for. While it might have been folly to challenge him in swordplay, it had brought his Susanoo right inside her close range. 2 palms. Naruto grunted when 2 bony palms connected with his Susanoo's left hand, making him lose control over his flaming dark sword. The sword flickered and was soon extinguished as Hinata descended upon him. 4 palms. 8 palms. 16 palms. 32 palms. 64 palms. The strikes came one after another, more painful than the one before as it rapidly inflicted poisonous chakra across his Susanoo while destroying his control over the monstrous form little by little. Divine Slash. Hinata and her bone warrior-clad Kyuubi were sent crashing away as Dawn delivered a horizontal slash that teared itself through the bone warrior's chest cleanly. Naruto coughed even more blood this time as he collapsed to one knee. The effects of his enemy's strikes were now taking their toll over his body as he felt her chakra invading his system and fight to establish dominance. He fought her inside his body just as viciously as he did against her out on the battlefield. But it was a losing battle. She was just too strong. His chakra reserves were dwindling and his entire body ached with pain in order to maintain the Susanoo. All these years, he had survived on numerous battlefields not just because of his skills but because he knew whom to fight and whom not to. To his shame, this opponent was far stronger than him. Maybe with Madara and Hashirama's help he could have put her down, but alone it was an uphill task. Nonetheless, he knew he had made a promise to his friends and comrades. He had to kill this woman. The third and final choice. He paused as Priestess Shizuka's prophecy about him came back to haunt him. She had foreseen 3 instances in his life when his decisions would necessarily change his and the world's destiny at large. The first was the night when he had to violently put down those Uchiha rebels led by his own granduncle. It earned him the name Kinslayer and unbearable scorn from his own people, but it kept the Uchiha clan united. The second was the moment when he had to give up his quest of vengeance against the Senjus and ally with them for the sake of peace. He married a Senju, became a king and lead mankind through one of its most darkest wars. And now it was time for the final choice. From the corner of his eyes, he saw the remaining 20,000-something enemy forces encircling him from all sides across the ocean. While the bone-armored Kyuubi stepped forward. He saw the silent pleading in his trapped friend's eyes, knowing that staying here to fight would only end in one outcome. Last chance, Uchiha Naruto. Surrender and live. Refuse and die, challenged Hinata. For a cursed moment, he wanted to take her offer. All these years he had fought battle after battle, earned love and hatred but never found the peace he so desperately wanted. I can't defeat her, can I? He asked out loud to himself, and saw the forms of Indra's lingering soul alongside many of his former ancestors appear around him. Even saying those bitter words hurt because it meant he had failed. But it was the truth. No, you cannot admit it, Indra. It was like the final blow that made the young king collapse to his knees on top of his dragon's head. The weight of the entire war and all that was lost finally crushing him altogether. The ghosts of his ancestors watched over him as he fought back the lump in his throat and the burning in his lone eye. All this time, I kept on fighting, in the hopes of finding the peace I always wanted. There were so many times when I felt death would be so much better, and yet here I am, this close to my dreams only to never see them getting fulfilled, lamented Naruto. Some part of his heart wanted to go back home and spend his remaining days with Tsunade. He wanted to protect his daughters and teach his son all he knew. He wanted to see his brother and father. Madara. A faint wistful smile came upon his lips as he thought about the few battles they both had fought alongside each other. Of all the times Madara had stood by him when everyone else hadn't. If only. I wish I can see them all again, he whispered remorsefully. The choice is still yours to make, Naruto. We are the past and you are the present. You can always write your own history, advised one of the other Uchiha kindly. Naruto went silent for several long moments before his voice barely above a whisper was heard by Indra. Can you see them? Asked the young king. At first, the Uchiha patriarch couldn't see what the boy was hinting at until one by one the forms started to take shape. A few at first, then a dozen, followed by hundreds and finally thousands upon thousands more. All with haunting looks surrounding the lonely king from every side. Their sorrowful eyes staring upon the young boy. Naruto suppressed his tears on seeing so many familiar faces around him. People that should be alive but now stared at him with their ghostly faces. Naori, Takeshi, Kagami, Tobirama, Itama, and the thousands of warriors of both shinobi and civilian birth who died fighting for him. His comrades. He looked back at Indra and his other ancestors who could also see what he was seeing. They are watching me. They want to see the objective they gave their lives for to be fulfilled. They want justice from their king, whispered Naruto. Now that he said those words, he could feel the burden fully resting on his shoulders. For them, the war was not yet over. When he closed his eyes, he saw Tsunade more beautiful than ever, cradling a small bundle in her arms. She smiled at him as two little girls arrived by her side. Both had pale skin like him, their eyes dark like their ancestors, their hair black and brown respectively. They all smiled at him and extended their hands towards him, even that tiny infant with a happy gurgle. He felt his heart shatter. He opened his eye and saw Indra kneeling in front of him. It was all a dream, wasn't it? A wishful illusion, nothing more, whispered Naruto, his voice brimming with sorrow and defeat. He felt someone lay a firm but comfortable hand on his shoulder, and on looking up he saw Indra staring at him with nothing but pride and determination. You have fought well, my child. You have brought honor and glory to our clan, united the world when no one else could. It's only because of you that mankind is still standing. I know it hurts, I who watched my own children be torn apart again and again for centuries, to have my hopes and dreams be crushed again and again until you came along. I know what your dream means to you, and we all shall support whatever choice you make. But you already know what needs to be done here, advised Indra kindly with a pained smile. He received a hesitant nod from the young monarch as Indra helped the boy to get back on his feet. They both saw the world covered in darkness with heavy clouds weeping from the skies. Naruto looked back at Indra and saw his ancestor give him a pained but determined look. Bring hope back into this world, whispered all his ancestors. Indra looked deep into his eyes, revealing his final and ultimate choice. Give up on your dreams and die. It didn't break his heart unlike he feared before. Instead, he felt a strange acceptance seep into his heart as he realized some part of his soul always knew that this could possibly be his destiny. Or maybe he was desperately trying to find some meaning where there was none. It didn't matter. Death was a part of every shinobi's life. He glanced across the battlefield where the sea was raging, the clouds were thundering, the enemy army surrounding him and getting closer, the enemy queen still waiting for him on top of her monster. There was nobody there. Not his friends, not his family, not his comrades, not his wife or children. Just him. He looked at the heavens again, hoping to see the visage of Izuna one more time, but his beloved brother was not there as well. In these godforsaken lands, he was all alone, far from home and away from everyone he had loved or cared for. So, this is where I die. He closed his eye, allowing the pain and sorrow to overwhelm him. He watched each and every one of his dreams be destroyed inside of him, and it was the most agonizing pain he had ever experienced in his life. From acceptance came pain. From pain came anger. From anger came hatred. From hatred came power. Tears of blood fell from his eyes. The very sea around him started to boil, the air started to roar, the land started to tremble, and the skies screamed. He opened his eye to save the world. To awaken the power of salvation. Chapter 44. The end. 2 days earlier, Tsunade hesitantly walked towards her good brother's chambers in order to check on his condition. As she walked through the corridor, she saw a small group of Hatake, Namikaze and 2 Uchiha guards standing outside the door. They all bowed to her and she gave them an acknowledging nod in return. These past few days had been strange to say the least. Lord Tajima was struggling to keep peace in the city while also managing the horde of refugees. Their food was running low and there was not enough shelter to protect everyone from the raging snowstorms. Most importantly, the people had watched their king and his small force march off to what was most probably a suicide mission. They were getting restless, believing that their king was gone forever, and it only placed more burden on Lord Tajima. The Uchiha patriarch had been kind to her, even treating her with respect if not affection. Tsunade knew it was quite awkward for the older man to have her as his daughter by law. For his entire life he had been busy killing off Tsunade's family. Not that her own family was any different, but Tajima had requested her to heal Madara. She had seen the desperation in the older man's eyes, and it had made one thing clear to her. Tajima didn't believe his youngest son was ever going to return home. The Uchiha leader had resigned himself and was trying his best to keep his crumbling world from falling apart. If Naruto died, then Madara would be king if she failed to deliver a boy. Even if she did, she feared for the child's life, for it would just be a babe while Madara was a grown man. A powerful leader whom many supported, and in these desperate times they would flock to him rather than an infant who couldn't even feed himself, much less humanity. She protectively placed her hand upon her belly as she opened the door. As soon as she stepped inside, she was shocked to see the nurse watching over the Uchiha lord was unconscious. Most of all, Madara was awake. He seemed surprised by her entering the room, and she instantly noticed he had already donned his battle armor. Their eyes met and she knew right then that the man knew exactly what happened during the time he was injured. "You shouldn't be here," he said harshly, even as he continued his search across his room. "You know," she whispered, earning a curt nod from him as he hastily grabbed a very familiar sword. Madara flinched on seeing tears arrive in the Senju woman's eyes as he held Raijin no Ken in his hands. "Her brother's sword." "Your brother gave it to me," he said hesitantly, not sure what to say. He had never been good in dealing with emotional people, women even more so. Gods, it should be Naruto here to console his wife, and instead the brave fool had marched to his death. Was he in pain when she asked him, her weeping eyes haunting his very soul? Yes. He had watched Tobirama die. It was thanks to the Senju's sacrifice that they had come so far. Madara glanced at the unconscious nurse whose mind he had ransacked for information. Knowing that the woman before him had lost all but one of her brothers, most of her clan, and possibly even her husband, made him feel something for her. It made him step forward and raise his hand to place it comfortably on her shoulder, but he stopped himself at the last moment. They hardly knew each other and he didn't know if the gesture would be appreciated. "I couldn't save your brother, but I will save mine. I will get your husband back even if it's the last thing I do," he promised fiercely. She looked into his dark eyes and saw the fierce determination. "You're not fit to fight," she protested. He had made a remarkable recovery, but he was not fit to fight. Not by a long shot. "I belong with my brother. If I lose him..." Tsunade had always heard stories of how much Madara loved his last and youngest brother. But now watching this man who had just barely dodged death still willing to go against it again just for his brother. "You'll never reach the land of water. Naruto took the dragon with him," she suggested, making him curse out loud. To her shock, he closed his eyes, and when he opened them they were burning with the Mangekyo Sharingan. Even in this condition, Madara Uchiha still had this much power was something she had never imagined in her wildest dreams. "He needs my help. I cannot just sit here and wait for him to die. Most of my wounds are healed, but my chakra pathway is still recuperating. I can reach the land of water on my Susanoo in 2 days, even lesser if someone supplies me chakra," he rambled, as he stepped towards his wardrobe to gather his remaining weapons. What he didn't realize was the idea that he had planted in her head. Naruto had refused her aid again and again, fearing her presence on the battlefield would put their baby in danger, but she had been nearly useless sitting here and healing strangers while her own husband faced his death. "Let me come with you," she insisted, making Madara stare at her as if she had lost her mind. "No. My brother would kill me if I risked." He turned around and came face to face with a stormy pair of hazel eyes as a hand grabbed him by the shoulder. Madara winced against the monstrous pressure as his healing bones groaned in pain. That was not a request, she commanded icily. He looked deep into her eyes for several long moments before he laughed. Tsunade was about to punch the arrogant man to oblivion when he gave her a respectful nod. You're all right, Senju. My brother chose a worthy queen. Tsunade was surprised to hear those frank but honest words. It made her realize how different Madara was to his brother. With Naruto it was always complicated. He was a mystery she had to solve little by little every day, but Madara was a sword. A very powerful sword. Sharp, straight, and loyal. She was again surprised when the door to his chambers opened again as a group of armed warriors stepped inside. Kiara Hatake, Den Nara, Rei Namikaze, Hiruzen Sarutobi, Tobi Shimura, and Shiki Aburame. A few of them were still recovering from their injuries, but they were still here, armed and ready to follow the man they believed in. Madara. The small squad including Tsunade saw the eldest son of Tajima Uchiha stare at them with a ferocity that ignited a new wave of determination in their eyes, obliterating any doubts or fears they had about their mission. Let's bring our people home. Moments later, the city bells were ringing loudly and thousands of shinobi stared in awe as a monstrous shadow flew past them. It had the face of a demonic bull with arms and the body of a human warrior with wings. Shrouded in dark flames and malicious chakra, the creature roared, much to the discomfort of not just the city populace but also the small squad currently flying inside the beast. Tsunade had never felt her chakra drain so rapidly as she supplied Madara the energy, and in return the Uchiha let them fly past hundreds of miles at rapid pace. The rest of the squad could only watch in silence as the land of fire started to flow past them. Most of all, they were silenced when the bloodthirsty look in Madara's eyes and felt pity for the ones about to face his wrath. However, the one most surprised was none other than Tsunade herself. In the back of her mind, she never had a very good impression of Madara Uchiha. The man was a conqueror and prone to harsh decisions. He would also benefit the most if Naruto died in the land of water, as that would give Madara the chance to rule the world. Yet, the same bloodthirsty man had ignored all caution and charged off deep into the enemy's territory. Why? She asked curiously, and for the first time saw a soft expression arrive in the older man's eyes. When our brothers died, everything changed. People looked at me and Naruto very differently because we awakened the Sharingan. Even our own father and aunt who cared for us couldn't help but try to shape our destiny. Everybody wanted something from us, be they our family, allies or enemies. It made us realize that we only had each other, confessed Madara sadly. He looked at her and she could not help but witness the fierce love he had for his brother. It was an emotion more powerful than anything she had ever seen. My brother has sacrificed a lot in his life for me, our clan and our damned race. He deserves the happiness this cursed life never gave him. He deserves to see his child, be with you and lead our people. I will give him that, even if it means I have to drag his stupid ass kicking and screaming from that shithole, said Madara fiercely. His voice strangely sounded remorseful, which Tsunade had never imagined hearing. How will we get him out of there, much less face the enemy? Not all of us are in our best shape. What's your plan? Warned Tsunade, and saw him clenching his fist before he looked at her with barely contained fury. My plan is to fight until they are all dead or my brother is in my arms. My plan is to fight, to try, and get my brother out of there. I will do that or die trying, promised Madara. A soft smile came upon her lips as she realized one thing that Hashirama had always tried to explain to her, but she could never grasp it. Madara was many things, but his one redeeming trait was his love and loyalty. For all his power and fierceness, she saw the man was afraid. He didn't say it, but his tense posture and restless eyes were a stark proof of that fear. Madara Uchiha loved his brother more than anything in the world. She smiled in relief and nodded at the man respectfully, even as she increased the amount of her chakra into his body, making the Susanoo fly even more faster. He's lucky to have you, she praised, and saw a small smile arrive on Madara's lips. Memories of them training together, fighting on the battlefield, the moments when Naruto made harsh but right choices that saved their clan came flooding back in Madara's heart. His brother had always been loyal to their family and clan, had always made decisions that benefited them and the world at large, no matter how much burden or scorn it earned him. In a way, Naruto had prevented Madara and Tajima from continuing a losing war against the Senjus. His decision of making peace with the Senjus had rekindled Madara's prized friendship with Hashirama. I'm lucky to have him, whispered Madara, as he fought back the lump in his throat. Hang in there, little brother. Land of water, present time. Hinata Otsutsuki couldn't believe her eyes. It was impossible for any mortal human to attain that power on their own. Even her own was gifted to her by Kaguya before she was sealed away. The sage had that power because he was the original ancestor of the Uchiha and Senju, having both their bloodlines. Then why was an Uchiha able to awaken that eye? She could not help but ask herself that question as the earth and seas rumbled. She watched his Mangekyo get transformed into a very familiar purple ringed eye. Zetsu had always told her that only someone with Uchiha and Senju cells could awaken the rinnegan, and only through immense grief. Then why was Naruto, whose ancestral line never had any Senju blood or the lack of grief in the current situation, be able to awaken this power? She ransacked all information she had about the Dragon King quickly and soon enough found the answer. His wife. Tsunade Senju was one of the most powerful senjus in all of history. Her inhuman physical strength and healing abilities were legendary, only surpassed by that of her eldest brother, Hashirama. Her blood was strong, perhaps even more stronger than Naruto's, and she had married the man and was pregnant with his child. Those nights of physical intimacy with his wife must have been the time when he unknowingly came in touch with her DNA. It was barely enough, but still had done the job of awakening his ultimate power. And one look in his resigned eyes showed her the other condition to awaken this power was also fulfilled. He had accepted death and destruction of his dreams to put her down. He raised his palm forward and her world erupted in pain. Kurama howled in pain as the very sea started to boil, as large wasps of steam started to rise to the heavens. Many of the Otsutsuki minions screamed against the heat and pain, while their commanders quickly ordered them back to the beach, having realized that this fight just went out of their league. The fox, through his pain and submission, could hardly believe his own eyes as he watched his best friend awaken the sage's power. Before Kurama could ponder over his doubts, his world was consumed in a sea of pain. Everything had changed. The world, which was previously a sea of colors, was now nothing more than different forms of energy, all of it visible before his eye. He could feel the sheer amount of energy present in nature. In the air, in the sky, in the sea, in the land, so much energy. He looked at his own reflection in the sea and was barely able to make out his new eye. Judging from Hinata and Kurama's gaping looks of horror and shock, he had awakened the rinnegan. It was different. He didn't know why, but some part of his heart was at peace, a tranquility he had not experienced in his entire life. It gave him more inner strength and awareness about the world around him. He idly wondered if the sage had also felt what he was feeling right now. He glanced around and realized that he had to deal with the enemy army first before he confronted Hinata once and for all. Most people thought the sea to be cold, dangerous and dark. But there was also so much warmth hidden deep inside its heart. It gave life to every creature on earth while surrounding itself in darkness forever. A feeling he could experience very clearly with his own determination to set his own feelings aside for the sake of mankind. He reached out to that warmth and it accepted his embrace wholeheartedly with a smile. Their energies merged in an explosion of colors, painting the world anew. Screams echoed all across the battlefield as dozens of Otsutsuki thralls started to feel the change. The sea itself had started to boil, unleashing steam and agony as thousands of years of warmth hidden under its heart answered its new master's summon. The Otsutsuki commanders must have seen the enormous energy being unleashed from the darkness of the sea, making their pale faces lose the last of their color. Their pale white eyes stared in horror across the ocean before landing at him fearfully. To the beach. The army of dead instantly heeded their commander's call as Hayate Otsutsuki lead them to safety away from the monstrous energy rising from the sea, threatening to burn them all to ashes. Naruto watched the little creatures run, but their movements were so slow, so pitiful in a vain effort to escape their fate. He heard another agonizing scream and saw a whirlpool had appeared around the Otsutsuki queen and her hideous creature of bone and the fox. A second later, thousands of years' worth of heat pent up beneath the sea came charging to the surface. The bone warrior screamed as its entire body started to melt away. The Kyuubi roared in agony as large swaths of its skin was consumed instantly. Hinata Otsutsuki yelled as she tried to save herself from the heat. The rings in Naruto's soul eye started to turn, and strangely he felt so many strings opening in front of him. He chose the nearest thread and was surprised to see himself and Hinata locked in a fierce battle. He watched her bone warrior be reformed again as she used the Kyuubi to launch a Bijudama right where his comrades were currently trying to detonate the Bijou bomb. He backed away and unknowingly stumbled upon another thread. Again, this time he watched himself engaged in a battle of ninjutsu against the enemy queen until she summoned a damn meteor from the heavens and pummeled him into the sea. Another thread, another possibility of him burning away half of her remaining army in one attack while she managed to inflict a deadly gash on his Susanoo warrior. He winced as he felt large quantities of his chakra being consumed so quickly, even as more and more threads opened up before him. What is this? The ultimate evolution of our eyes, Naruto whispered Indra in awe, even as the Uchiha founder himself saw the series of threads before them waiting to be explored. What do you mean? Asked the king irritatedly, as he glanced through another thread only to wince in pain as the strain bore down on him. The Sharingan allows us to predict our enemies' incoming attacks and their moves before they reach us. However, it's only halfway complete because we can only predict them after our enemy launches them or is about to launch them. But your power surpasses that weakness to gaze into the very future itself. Right now you are seeing the various possibilities of your battle against your enemy. Look into them all and choose the one most favorable to you, explained Indra seriously, making Naruto's eyes go wide as he realized the implications of his new power. The eye of the future, he whispered. The possibilities were limitless. With this power he could not just rule the world but also defeat the Otsutsuki clan when they arrived on Earth for their conquest. Eager, he opened his eye, but instead of salvation he found an endless chasm. A world of threads. His mind nearly exploded as the chaos hit him faster than lightning. So many voices, so many futures, so many people, all of them whispering, yelling, crying, laughing, dying, being born. It was not him traversing the chasm, but the chasm consuming him. A firm hand grabbed him from behind, yanking him backwards just as the ground beneath his feet vanished. He gulped on seeing a wave of darkness enshrouding the chasm away. He came back to his senses to see he was kneeling on his feet, his body drenched in sweat and a large portion of his chakra vanished. He grasped his eye as agonizing pain teared through every muscle in his body. He fought it back, but it was the feeling of having every muscle in your body be set on fire. Indra knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder once more. This power is a double-edged sword, my son. Even more dangerous than the Mangekyo, for it would only render you blind through overuse, but this is a sinister temptation that would drive you mad at first before ending your life in the most painful ways. Be cautious, warned Indra. He received a terrified nod from the young king, who seemed shaken from that brief moment when he had tried to see too far ahead in the future and almost got killed because of that mistake. Use as it you would a Kinjutsu, advised Indra, as the founder of the Uchiha again faded inside the Susanoo's corporeal form. Naruto heeded that advice as he reconnected himself with the nearly limitless supply of natural energy around him. Before his very eyes, he saw nearly 1,000 replicas of himself emerge from the deep waters. Their sharp swords just like his own, but their energy so different from his because they were not a part of his energy but that of nature's, given shape by his rinnegan. The clone army formed ranks on their own before marching straight in a uniformed fashion towards the retreating Otsutsuki forces. He suddenly coughed more blood and felt a foreign chakra tearing through his body, eager to reach his heart. It was so full of rage and hatred, threatening to burn everything in its path. He held it at bay and saw Hinata Otsutsuki had managed to make her creature take to the skies and was now utterly furious. At this rate, he only had a few minutes before he met his end. Steeling himself, he grasped both his hands together. The knowledge was there at the back of his mind and his dojutsu was whispering it to him. Instead of resisting or trying to gain dominance, he simply allowed the energy to flow from his body, allowing instincts and faith to take over. Banshu Tenin. Hinata's bone warrior cracked wide open as a thundering mass went flying outside its protection. Her eyes widened when the now freed Kyuubi fell directly before her enemy Susanoo. The monstrous humanoid warrior slashed its holy sword, shattering all her chakra rods controlling the fox. The beast moaned in agony as it slowly started its efforts to rise back on its feet now that it was free. She roared as she brought her broken bone warrior right atop the Susanoo. Their blades clashed and she was pushed back even as she regenerated her bone warrior. Channeling more and more of her chakra, she allowed the beast to enlarge so much in mass that it ultimately had to separate into 4 different clone replicas that soon surrounded the Susanoo and the wounded Kyuubi. She clenched her fists again, bringing down lightning from the sky and obliterating Naruto's water clone army before it could reach her own retreating forces. The king grimaced at the instant decimation but never lost focus as he was once again surrounded. Her chakra receivers might have been destroyed, but they had consumed quite a lot of chakra from the fox and also rendered him paralyzed for a while. The fox was wounded and would most probably be unable to fight for a while. One of the bone warriors tried to attack the fox but was swiftly blocked and repelled by the defiant Susanoo. More came again, and every time the king fought them off, shielding the wounded beast. Why? She asked him, curious as to why he would fight so hard to defend a beast like the Kyuubi. Naruto looked down at the fox before a faint but proud smile came upon his lips as he glanced at his archenemy. That's what friends do, woman. Hinata was very disappointed. Honor will get you killed, Naruto. This is exactly why humanity can never defeat the Otsutsuki clan. They have no honor or weak emotions, they are conquerors. It is why Kaguya wanted to unite humanity under her firm command to give your moronic race a chance at survival, said Hinata bitterly. By making us like your dead minion or Zetsu creatures? We would like to stand and die on our feet rather than be turned into wretched and miserable creatures for the sake of survival. For you, the fox is just a beast to be used and thrown. But for me, he is my first friend. We have fought together in so many battles and I will do everything in my power to protect him, promised Naruto. He didn't give her any time to counter his argument as he swiftly grabbed the wounded fox and took to the skies. He heard the Otsutsuki queen curse loudly as her hideous creations started to form their own bony wings before following after him quickly. But he had already taken a head start and wanted to use it to his advantage. Zooming in one of the few mountains in the inner lands, he quickly set them down, taking care to place Kurama gently. For the first time, he got a detailed look on the fox's wounds. There were large holes on all but one of his legs, most of its tails were cut or burned, there were at least 3 gaping holes across its torso and a nasty gash across its face. All wounds inflicted by his own hands. I'm sorry, he whispered apologetically. Don't be. What do we do now? Asked Kurama, his voice hoarse with pain and fatigue as he still felt the remaining elements of the cursed Otsutsuki queen's chakra trying to subdue its own. Shrink yourself. Kurama never asked a question and instantly lowered his size to that of a small horse and saw Naruto closing his eyes. The beast could feel the enemy queen getting closer along with her army of monsters. To its surprise, their main army led by the Kingsguard was actually able to hold the enemy at bay while the bomb was almost ready. I'll link you up with Shisui. Help them out if you can and retreat to the land of fire when the time comes. Shisui will keep you safe, ordered Naruto, as he lowered his Susanoo. Come with me, pleaded Kurama, making a pained smile arrive on his friend's face. There's no time. The next generation will need you, Kurama. Unite mankind and your Bijou brethren when the time comes. I know you can do it, said Naruto gently, even as the Bijou furiously shook its head. I won't leave without you, argued Kurama fiercely, but was stilled when the Susanoo placed a hand on its head affectionately. You have done your part, Fox. You have brought Uchiha and Senju together, which might just save this world. By now you must have realized that I am not the chosen one but someone else. Protect him, requested Naruto. Realization dawned upon the fox as he remembered the unborn child growing within Tsunade. A child with both Uchiha and Senju blood, a true successor of both powerful clans. The true heir of the sage. How can you be so sure that the next generation can shoulder that burden? That they will be strong enough to face the Otsutsuki clan and win? Asked Kurama desperately, earning a nod from his friend. I don't know really, but I believe they can. My generation has given them the foundation by uniting the world under one banner. It will be up to you and people like Madara to keep the peace while preparing every living being on this planet for the final war. I have done my part and now I leave the rest to you, he whispered sincerely. We will need you, Naruto. You are the finest leader I have ever seen and you have a mind for war. Your people followed you into this war so far because they believe in you, they love you. Please rethink about this decision, urged Kurama, but was left heartbroken when Naruto shook his head. Hinata Otsutsuki needs to be put down along with her entire army. Humanity cannot prepare for a war against the Otsutsuki before we put an end to all our internal wars. I have to be the one to put an end to her, someone else might not be up to the task, declined Naruto compassionately. Kurama looked into his friend's eye and knew the path that Naruto had chosen. A heavy burden settled upon the beast's shoulders as he longingly looked at the boy he had known for so long. It would be a lie to say that the time he spent with Naruto was perhaps the finest of his long life. The boy was a true king and a good friend. They had their fair share of joys and sorrows, but Naruto never gave up on him. But now he was asking Kurama to leave him behind to die alone. He looked at the boy standing inside the Susanoo and could not help but again notice how young he was with such a long life ahead of him. The young dragon. His people had given him that name, and he would stay that way in their hearts. Forever young. Kurama saw the first silhouettes of the enemy appearing on their horizon and knew the time to make his choice was upon him. Either stay and die with his friend or retreat in order to unite mankind for the final war. It would be a colossal and very important task to keep men and Bijou from becoming enemies once more. When his brothers and sisters were reformed, they would be wary, even hostile to men courtesy of this war. Kurama could imagine mankind having similar feelings due to the amount of death and destruction the Bijou had wreaked upon them under Hinata's forced control. He could not help but bitterly realize why Naruto wanted him to survive. As the strongest Bijou, Kurama had some leverage over his own kin. He could persuade them to make peace or force them to do the same with men. If he knew Naruto well, then he had likely ordered Madara and his wife to do the same with men. Even now the king had his eyes set on the future, his every action dedicated to the survival of his people while sacrificing all his personal happiness. Even his life. It only made the choice even tougher for Kurama, but he made it nonetheless because he saw what his friend wanted. "I promise," pledged the beast, as a lone tear fell from its eyes. Naruto gave him one last smile before picking him up with his Susanoo hand. "May we meet again," Kurama said, Naruto with an eye smile, breaking the Bijou's heart even further. With a mighty roar, the Susanoo took to the skies while pulling its arm backward. Kurama caught one final glance at his friend's smile before he was violently thrown several miles away and straight toward Shisui's position. The last thing he saw before darkness overcame was the sight of his friend charging towards the enemy. Shisui parried a horizontal slash from one of the Kaguya warriors and twisted himself to appear behind the man. Without hesitation, he sliced his foe's head off as Itachi and Mikoto together plunged their blades into one of the last Otsutsuki clan warriors. The three friends warily looked at each other and then at the graveyard full of rotting corpses around them. Hagoromo, Kaguya, the dead, summons and even Otsutsuki. All of them had fallen to their blades and the remaining 200 could only gape in horror at the massacre of their comrades at the hands of 3 Kingsguard and their clone forces. He could not help but admire their enemies' bravery or stupidity as the last remaining Otsutsuki yelled a battle cry, making its surviving fighters charge as well. Shisui tiredly raised fury in his hands and watched as Mikoto and Itachi did the same with their own swords. The clone army was destroyed, but they had taken their enemies with them before being defeated. Kakashi had rallied the few survivors from the original force and was keeping the barrier safe, serving as the last line of defense alongside Mifune, should the Kingsguard fall. Danzo was injured and so was Hanzo, but it wouldn't be long before the Uzumaki completed their objective and then they could all go home. It gave him hope as he charged to meet his enemies. Both forces barely had any chakra left and knew this battle would be finished the old way. Shisui swiftly blocked a hail of kunai thrown at him before sidestepping a vertical slash by one of the Hagoromo. He had to swiftly jump in the air and avoid being taken down to the ground by 2 desperate dead thralls. The Kingsguard commander took out his own kunai from his pouch before embedding them into his enemies. The satisfying sound of the explosive seals going off and taking down at least a dozen of his foes was very satisfying. Mikoto was surrounded by the last few Kaguya, all of whom lunged at her madly. A big mistake. Most people would have missed it, but Shisui's eyes didn't. He watched Mikoto channel chakra to her feet before vanishing past her first foe, her sword already slicing through the man's head. With her free hand, she slapped a seal on the collapsing corpse before kicking into 4 other of his comrades. Before anybody could react, the corpse exploded, shredding everything nearby in shrapnel and broken metal. Her last 3 opponents hastily raised their swords. She clashed her blade against the first, ducked the attack from the second before kicking the third enemy in the groin. Throwing her last smoke bomb, she used that small moment to stab the Kaguya whom she had kicked in the groin. He screamed as she lodged her blade into his heart and used his body as cover to absorb the counter-stabbing from his 2 remaining comrades. Twisting herself around her enemies, she used her sword to carve them open from behind and ended their lives. Shisui was pleased even as Mikoto didn't relish her victory and charged forward towards an approaching squad of dead warriors. Instead, the Kingsguard commander ran towards Itachi, who was engaged in a fierce duel with the last Otsutsuki commander. Already, Shisui was imagining a series of moves to take down this opponent. If the Otsutsuki was killed, then they had won this battle. But instead of lunging into the battle, Shisui had to hastily grab Itachi and jump away just in time as a shadow violently fell from the skies and right over the shocked Otsutsuki commander. When the dust cleared, Shisui and Itachi were shocked to see a mortally wounded Kyuubi lying upon the now crushed corpse of the Otsutsuki and a few other of his minions. "What the hell?" asked the usually stoic Itachi in shock. But Shisui glanced into the fox's pained eyes before his attention was diverted towards a massive explosion happening near the coastal area. It made the land tremble in its fury and only solidified Shisui's worst fears. If the fox was sent here in this condition, it could only mean. "Where's Naruto?" asked Mikoto hastily, some fear creeping into her shaken voice. "Retreat," wheezed the Bijou painfully, hoping they would understand their king's last wish. By now, Kakashi had arrived beside them along with a few able-bodied fighters. Shisui looked at the fox and then at his two childhood friends. For once, their thoughts were united. Kakashi, take the Kyuubi to safety and retreat once Nagato gives the nod, ordered Shisui. Where are you going, Commander? Asked Kakashi hesitantly, and saw Shisui glancing at the far-off battlefield. To our king, replied Itachi calmly, as he sheatheded his sword and stoically grabbed a few discarded weapons from the nearby dead enemies. Mikado roared as the last few enemy that were littering in the rear decided to be bold, but only lost their lives under her furious rage as she teared them apart with her sword with Kakashi and his men's help. Shisui silently drank from a small flask of water offered by the only medic of their group. You'll die if you go out there, warned Kurama, and was surprised when Shisui looked back at him with a determined gaze. The Kingsguard doesn't flee. But, dead or alive, we'll bring our king home or join him in death. Now go. Barked Mikado fiercely. Shisui silenced Kakashi before the boy could protest as his two friends joined him. Thankfully, the medic resupplied them with what little chakra he could before the three Kingsguard charged towards the last battlefield. We won't leave you behind, Naruto. Hinata Otsutsuki observed the lone foe defiantly standing before her. The Susanoo had shrunk in size somewhat and its wings were gone now, most probably in order to preserve chakra. She realized her enemy was acting as the final line of defense between her and his comrades trying to set off that bomb. She could feel the rising unstable energy and knew she had very little time left to act. Her enemy was on his last legs and had refused all her advised to make the right choice. It left her with only one way, and what a shame, for Naruto Uchiha would have been a useful pawn in the wars to come. Maybe she could revive him as her thrall, he would make an excellent general. Finish him, she commanded. Hayate Otsutsuki nodded as he and his remaining several thousand-strong army surrounded the Susanoo from all sides. Attack! At once, hundreds upon hundreds of dead thralls charged towards the Susanoo loaded with hidden explosive seals on their bodies. The gigantic monster within the Susanoo turned most of the dead to ashes by unleashing wave upon wave of scorching flames. But still a few got through, rocking the Susanoo in explosions. While the dead distracted the Susanoo and its master, Hayate had finished his next move. Hinata was satisfied when her commander and his army together assaulted the earth and shattered it. The Susanoo suddenly lost balance as the ground beneath its feet sunk into the earth. She yelled at her four monstrous bone warrior forms at the exact moment. The beasts leapt into the air and she grinned when Naruto grimaced. Expecting a duel, Naruto feebly tried to raise dawn and made a mistake. The bone warriors exploded and the world turned white. Hayate Otsutsuki grinned as the dust cleared. He and his men cheered on seeing the Susanoo lying on its knees with its entire body covered in large bone shards. Even the dragon hidden inside was not spared and was pierced brutally. At such close range, the four bone warriors had never given the Dragon King any time to evade their suicidal attack. Hundreds upon hundreds of bone shards had rained down upon the Susanoo from all sides. It must have fought valiantly, but even there was a limit to its defense. Crack! They all cheered once more as the Susanoo finally shattered and the dragon inside collapsed dead to the ground with a mighty crash. A mangled corpse of a man literally destroyed by bones fell to the battlefield, never to rise again. Hayate was about to order one of his men to check that the enemy king was dead when Hinata herself marched forward. "My queen!" protested Hayate. She didn't say anything, but her cold look silenced any further protests that Hayate wanted to make. He watched her raise the corpse in the air and saw a satisfied smile arrive on her face. The body before her exploded in a puff of smoke. She twisted backwards, already conjuring a bone spear and swinging it upwards even as the dark portal spewed forth her arch-enemy in the flesh. Slash! Her spear pierced clean through her enemy's armor and lodged itself deep into his chest while his own holy sword teared through her neck mercilessly. Both warriors gurgled in pain, but before Hinata could do anything her entire body was set aflame courtesy of Dawn's power. Hayate screamed as his queen burned to death, and to his horror, it released the jutsu controlling the dead warriors. They all started dropping one by one, leaving him alone with only half his army made up of his own clansmen, Kaguya and Hagoromo fighters. 10,000 bloodthirsty warriors against one mortally wounded king. All of them overtaken by rage and murder as they charged furiously at the one who had destroyed their dreams. It had all happened so fast, leaving no room for either Hinata or her supporters to react. The Dragon King had deliberately took the mortal blow and allowed the destruction of not just his Susanoo but his dragon as well. He had placed all his bets on Hinata's arrogance over her powers and made her believe she had won, only to appear behind her blind spot to deliver the fatal blow himself. He never gave Hinata a chance by stabbing her straight in the neck before setting her on fire with Dawn's help. Now the Otsutsuki Queen's charred remains burned pitifully across her own lands. For all her powers, her arrogance led to her downfall by an opponent much more inferior to her in power but more superior in cunning. Yet, even in death Hinata had left her mark upon her killer. Naruto lay on his knees grasping for breath and trying desperately to grasp the spear lodged in his chest. The poison in the weapon had already spread through his body. Hayate was more than willing to send the king to hell. It was getting dark. White scorching pain burned across his body, consuming each and every part of his soul. Warm red liquid dropped from his chest, staining the world in crimson. All around him there was so much noise. The sound of metal clanking and angry roars reached him as he weakly gathered the last of his strength. It had worked. A desperate gamble, but it had worked. His world was drowning in pain, but with that was also present a feeling of satisfaction. He had done his duty. Fighting back the pain, he barely managed to get back on his feet and raise his sword once more. He could not see anything more than hazy blurs, but he could still hear them as they charged at him. The chaos reminded him of his first battle and how he had felt back then. The only difference was that he was not afraid today. He tore the bone spear from his chest, unleashing a torrent of blood soaking the ground once more. With Dawn in one hand, and the bone spear in the other, he prepared himself. All around him men were screaming, cursing, charging. He sensed the first attack from his right side and jumped in the air only to block twin strikes with the help of his sword. He twisted himself around and felt two blades piercing through the two enemies engaging him from the front and used his spear to destroy the ones behind him. When he hit the ground, the satisfying sound of heads rolling was all the proof he needed to know about his attacker's demise. Suddenly the attack stopped and he heard the enemy move back at the command of one firm voice. Attack! Naruto heard the sound of dozens of weapons being hurled at him at once. He was forced to retreat upwards across the mountain, all the while using his sword and spear to block the hail of kunai, shuriken and ninja weapons. Once or twice he even had to evade an explosive note thrown at him. He raised his hand forward, calling forth the last reserves of his chakra. He felt the army of sailing weapons stop mid-air before changing course and instead sailing right back at their casters. Unfortunately for him, the Otsutsuki commander and his clansmen blocked most of those weapons, preventing any further massive losses in their army. The precious few seconds of respite was put to good use as he created some further distance between him and his enemies, gathering high ground on his side across the mountain. His vision was getting hazy due to his wounds and severe loss of blood. His chakra was dwindling and his hands were shaking, which made it more difficult to hold Dawn. He stabbed the bone spear a few feet ahead of him, staring down at the approaching mass of enemies. He could not climb further up the mountains, for he barely had the strength left to do so. He tried to summon his space-time dimension but could only open a small fabric of that before it also vanished. He could force himself to create it again but didn't think he had the strength left to carry himself all the way to the land of fire. It was decided. It would happen here on this rugged mountain in a land far from his home. Exhaustion and pain was all he could feel at the moment, along with the cold sea breeze whistling past him. The air was full of death and the sound of approaching enemies. The skies devoured by dark clouds, stealing every last ounce of light away from the bloodstained lands. Here, I stand, he whispered, directly staring into Hayate Otsutsuki's merciless eyes. Finish him. Shisui and his two friends sailed across the land of water atop Itachi's crow summon. While it allowed them to move faster, it had nearly deprived Itachi of his energy, and it took Mikoto to support the tired boy. But none of them gave up as they were almost there. Strangely, the battlefield had fallen silent. Shisui's eyes widened when they flew across a charred battlefield where the badly butchered corpse of Naruto's dragon remained still. Not far from that was a burned body of a female, and on closer inspection, Shisui was shocked to see the faint visage of a very dead Hinata Otsutsuki in the corpse. He did it, whispered Mikoto in awe. Itachi saw thousands of rotting dead corpses lying around the dead queen, which could only mean the jutsu controlling them came to an end with her death. But if she was dead, then where was Naruto? He discovered a large group of people not far from their position. North, said Itachi quickly, and without any question the crow changed direction. Their crow gained speed and increased its height into the air as the three friends glanced at each other nervously. Their panic increased even more when they saw the remaining few thousand Otsutsuki fighters present all over a lone mountain. They sailed higher and found a new battlefield upwards across the mountain, marred with nearly another 100 corpses bearing the armor of Otsutsuki, Kaguya and Hagoromo warriors. Another large group of enemy fighters were up ahead surrounding a badly wounded warrior. One of the Otsutsuki had grabbed the barely conscious warrior by his neck and made him forcefully stand. Mikoto's eyes widened when she recognized the badly bruised face as the boy she had loved her entire life. Her cry died in her throat when the Otsutsuki stabbed a long spear clean through the boy's heart. Time slowed down for her as the Otsutsuki let his victim free off his firm grip while yanking the now bloodied spear out of the man's chest. A pained moan escaped from Naruto's lips as he fell to his knees with blood spilling wildly out of his chest. He looked up to the skies and his gaze connected with her. He fell to the ground and didn't rise up again. The Otsutsuki commander kicked the fallen king brutally before looking at his grinning comrades. He raised his blooded spear high in the air. To the young dragon, mocked Hayate. He laughed when his comrades held out pitiful imitations of a dragon's roar and kicked and spit at the boy on the ground. Hayate could not help but admit that the boy had been young, at least in the Otsutsuki's eyes. Forever young, concluded Hayate. He watched his comrades mercilessly drag the king over their shoulders to show his end to the rest of their army, eliciting another wave of cheering. Their queen had died, but they had taken down the enemy king as well, which was a bitter victory. But a victory nonetheless. Hayate grinned when he saw some of his comrades drag the severed head of the king's dragon. Another few men dropped the dead boy to the ground in a kneeling position as one of the Kaguya took up position behind him with a sword ready to cleave the king's head off. Their gruesome celebration was interrupted by a thunderous roar. He looked up and froze. 3 furious Uchiha were falling towards them from the skies with their blood-red eyes full of murder. Hayate cursed when he saw they were no ordinary Sharingan, but 3 pairs of Mangekyo. His luck went from bad to worse when one of his men pointed in the western direction where a fully armored demonic bull-headed Susanoo was charging towards them thunderously. The beast roared madly and Hayate took a step back when he saw none other than Madara Uchiha staring right into his very soul. It was over. Hiruzen Sarutobi had thought this war had shown him every gruesome sight in the world. But he was proven wrong again as he glanced at the destroyed mountain full of butchered corpses. Thousands upon thousands of enemy lay dead. Their end came for them in the form of fire and blood. They never had a chance. Madara and the 3 Kingsguard fell upon them in all their fury and hatred. Their Mangekyo powers shredding the enemy to pieces. To their credit, the enemy had fought till the last man, but they were all butchered mercilessly. Mikoto herself ended the enemy commander who stabbed Naruto by destroying his body on an atomic level with her Mangekyo. Madara, Shisui and Itachi butchered the rest of the enemy forces. Hiruzen along with Den Nara, Tobi Shimura, Rei Namikaze, Kiara Hatake and Shiki Aburame stood protectively around the weeping queen as she desperately tried to heal her motionless husband. "Come on. Wake up, Naruto," pleaded Tsunade worriedly, as she channeled more and more of her chakra to heal his wounds. Madara came storming towards them and knelt beside her. He gingerly picked up his cold brother and cradled him in his arms. For the first time in front of everyone, Madara Uchiha cried. "You promised me. Both of us against the world. Let's go home together, little brother," pleaded Madara, as tears fell from his cheeks. He helplessly looked at Tsunade, who was crying as she shook her head. Madara felt his world crumble before his very eyes. He looked at the beaten, bruised and scarred corpse of his brother. They had butchered the poor boy, they had taken his last brother from him. Madara wished he could kill them all again and again, making them experience the pain they had wreaked upon his heart. His brother's skin was so cold, his eyes closed and his body soaked in his own blood. His end had been full of pain and suffering. Madara glanced around and saw Kiara Hatake and Rei Namikaze desperately hold a weeping Tsunade in their arms. While Hiruzen, Den, Shiki, Tobi and Itachi did the same with a hysterical Mikoto. Shisui stood all alone far away from the others with his shoulders slumped. Even if his back was against them, Madara noticed the few tears that fell from the boy's eyes and hit the blood-stained ground. Madara glanced at the dark world around him as his entire life flashed before his eyes. All of his brothers were gone now. He was supposed to protect them, and all he had ever wished for was a world where his brothers and clansmen could be safe. He had fought so hard for that his entire life, but now that his dream was before him, there was no one left to live it. His brothers were dead, his clan was almost wiped out. Madara screamed. Mikoto watched the ever-strong Madara crumble before her eyes as his brother's death destroyed the last of his hope and sanity. She could not watch him like this, she could not watch that lifeless corpse of her lover lying before her. It was not supposed to end this way. It would seem she was not the only one who felt that way as she watched Tsunade steel herself and kneel beside Naruto, ignoring the protests from Kiara and Rei. She watched a broken Madara pleadingly look into the Senju Queen's eyes, almost begging her to stop his crushing pain. "I will bring him back," she promised fiercely, as tears fell from the Senju's eyes. "How?" asked Madara hesitantly. He felt a horrible feeling creep upon his heart as he watched Tsunade sadly clutch her belly and her own heart before she steeled herself and looked at Naruto. "A life for a life. The world needs him now more than ever, and my Kinjutsu will save his life," promised Tsunade. "At what cost?" asked Hiruzen warily. "My own and that of the child within me," confessed Tsunade, much to the horror of the ones around her. "No. You can't, my queen. The king would never forgive us if we let you and the prince die. He gave his life for your future," pleaded Itachi desperately. Surprisingly, Madara backed the boy. "Naruto will never be able to live with himself if his life came at the cost of yours and that child. I cannot allow it," said Madara sadly. "Then what do we do?" asked Den Nara hesitantly. "How does your jutsu work?" Tsunade looked up in surprise and saw Mikado approach towards her. She saw the same grief and pain in the Uchiha woman's eyes, knowing that she had loved Naruto as much as her was Tsunade's only consolation. "I transfer my life force to his own, healing his wounds while breathing new life into his body. This jutsu is forbidden among my clan, for the user will not survive at the end," said Tsunade honestly. "If it is too much for one person, then what about 3? Tsunade was again surprised, as it was Shisui and Itachi who asked that question as they knelt beside her. They must have seen the unsaid question lingering in her eyes as they glanced at their fallen king. "We failed in our duty and couldn't protect him. He was our king, our friend, we pledged him our lives and swore to sacrifice our lives for his own. It is time to honor that pledge," said Shisui calmly, with determination burning in his eyes. Itachi nodded as well, and Tsunade's surprise didn't end there, as after the Kingsguard came Den Nara, Tobi Shimura, Rei Namikaze, Kiara Hatake, Shiki Aburame, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and Madara himself. "I don't know the jutsu, but I hope all of our life force combined should help," suggested Madara, earning nods from everyone around him. "You all can die during the jutsu," she warned. "Troublesome, but it's a risk we'll have to take. His survival is necessary for the Uchiha Senju alliance and for peace to prevail across the world," said Den honestly, sealing his own acceptance of the risk. "King Naruto fought valiantly, he fought with honor and courage, and he died for us. This is the least we can do for him," suggested Hiruzen with a small smile, earning nods from Rei Namikaze and Kiara Hatake. "Give us our king back, Tsunade Senju. The cost does not matter, even if it means all our lives," asserted Tobi Shimura, earning a nod from Shiki Aburame in favor. Tsunade glanced at all of them. Uchiha, Shimura, Namikaze, Sarutobi, Hatake, Aburame, and a Senju. Families that had torn each other apart for thousands of years were now united to risk death for the sake of one man. She had never seen anyone inspire this kind of change in their cursed world. She had never imagined the world to be changed by the will of one man. Her gaze settled upon the smiling face of her husband, and it was then she understood why these people were willing to risk everything for him. They believed in him. Believed in the future he could give them by staying alive and helping them in the final war against the Otsutsuki clan. They were his friends, comrades, subordinates, and family. And so was she. One by one they all joined hands together and gently placed them over their king's corpse. Madara extended his own chakra-powered hand, which Tsunade connected with her own. To both of their surprise, 2 symbols appeared on their hands respectively. A half-moon graced Madara's hands while a glowing sun covered Tsunade's hands. Together, they placed their hand upon Naruto's chest. Chapter 45. Epilogue. 6 weeks later, a gasp. The world swarmed into his sight all at once, threatening to consume him in a blind light. He shut his eye before blinking it open a few times and adjusted it to his surroundings. It was then that the cold hit him. He glanced around and found himself resting in a very warm and comfortable bed. He tried to move his limbs and they felt so heavy, his throat was parched and he found it very hard to breathe. Still, he continued to struggle and managed to get himself seated upright with great pain and effort. The surroundings cleared even further and he slowly recognized the room as his personal chambers in the land of fire. Was this what the afterlife was like? The last thing he remembered was the Otsutsuki stabbing his heart and him falling to the ground. He looked down at his naked chest and saw a nasty pink scar over his chest, a reminder of that wound. What was happening? Just when he was about to panic, a wail erupted. A child's cry. He looked around and saw at least 3 cribs in the far-off corner. The babe was crying louder now. He didn't know what was going on but knew he had to help that child. Dead or not, he couldn't leave the child alone when it was in pain. His legs trembled against the cold when he placed them on the ground, but fortunately he was still wearing pants. At least he was not naked against the cold, which was a small blessing. He nearly fell flat on his face when he tried to get up but grabbed a nearby table to steady himself. When he was confident he wouldn't make a fool of himself, he took the first step with great effort. Then another and another. The babe was still crying and to his utter surprise was joined by another. Curious, he slightly increased his pace and managed to reach the cribs only to be left speechless. There were 3 of them, 1 beautiful boy and 2 little girls. The boy had soft blonde hair and pale white skin. His eyes were pale blue and his soft cheeks were full of moisture. His chubby little hands were desperately trying to reach out at him. The first girl had beautiful black hair and pale skin. She had dark eyes that were so haunting and beautiful at the same time. Her gaze was fixed on the boy and she was crying as she tried to reach out to him, but her own crib stopped her. The helplessness must be frustrating her, leading her to tears. The last child was sound asleep, unlike the other 2 around her. His breath nearly stopped when he noticed her soft brown hair, so much like his own and his Aunt Nauri. Even her eyes were the same as his and so was her skin. Tears arrived in his own eyes and he cursed the gods for their cruelty. Even after death, they tortured him like this. By throwing the ghost of a life he could have had right in front of his dead soul, of what could have been twisting itself like a knife in a broken heart. He had fought for what was right and even gave his life. But now, watching the ghosts of these children before him, wondering what his own children would have looked like, haunted him. He may have saved the world, but he had failed them as their father by leaving them all alone. The grief and guilt overwhelmed him as he miserably tried to touch the boy in order to take some pitiful comfort. He froze. His hand touched upon the child's head instead of passing right through him. Shocked, he placed his other free hand upon his own heart and felt the soft beating of his own heart. It was impossible. He shouldn't be here, but his own beating heart was a stark proof against that reality. Most of all, the baby boy had stopped crying, leading the other girl to also stop crying and look at him curiously. Afraid and eager, he carefully took the boy in his arms and brought him close to his chest. The child laughed. And he sought Tsunade in the child, which broke the overwhelming flood of emotions welling in his chest. Naruto broke down with tears rolling from his eye and desperately clutched the boy against his chest. He quickly reached over to the awake girl child and extended his finger to her. The child laughed happily and wrapped her tiny fist around his finger. He wept. The doors were slammed open, making him turn around to witness an equally shocked Tsunade and priestess Shizuka staring at him in awe and joy. In a flash, his wife crashed against him but was still careful enough not to hurt him too much. Tears were falling from her eyes as she kissed him passionately. His throat was parched and lips dry, but it still felt the most happiest moment of his life. He kissed her back fiercely. If this was his last night on earth, then he would still consider himself lucky, for he got to see his wife and children at least once. They softly broke the kiss only for her to hug him fiercely. None of them could say anything, for their voices had abandoned them, yet here in this dark chamber, holding Tsunade and their son in his arms, watching his 2 daughters being looked over by Shizuka, who smiled at him, it felt right. He was home. Naruto groaned against his brother's fierce hug but smiled nonetheless. Even Tajima came forward and hugged both of his sons together, even as a lone tear slipped from the old Uchiha's eyes. When they finally parted, there was a relieved smile on Madara's face and a contented one across Tajima's. "Took your sweet time," scolded Madara. "Sorry," apologized Naruto sheepishly. He didn't understand how he was still alive, only that Tsunade had saved his life, for which he again sent her a thankful smile as she held their son in her arms. "Leave the poor boy alone. He's back and that is all that matters," scolded Tajima, earning a scoff from his eldest son. "Of course, he's back. Uchihas are hard to kill," boasted Madara with not a hint of shame. Naruto smiled faintly, knowing how wrong his brother was. Death was death, and it came for all of them, whether it was an Uchiha or Senju. He would just count himself lucky to have another chance at life. "What happened out there?" he asked his eldest brother, as a solemn look arrived on everyone's faces. Madara went on to explain how he had charged straight into the land of water alongside Tsunade and his squad. He had expected Naruto to scold him outright for risking his wife and son's life, but the boy surprised him. "Thank you," everyone whispered the king gratefully, as he glanced at his 2 living daughters so near him. Madara himself smiled at the sight before going on to explain how Tsunade was willing to sacrifice her life and that of her son for his own. That earned her a sharp look from Naruto, and she had the grace to look away sheepishly. The king wanted to scold her for being so reckless but couldn't say anything, knowing her heart was in the right place. He was relieved to hear how the other clan heads and his own friends along with Madara had sacrificed their own life force to revive him. They had all shortened their lifespan for him. "I owe all of you a great deal," said Naruto gratefully, and saw his three friends rolling their eyes at him. "You owe us nothing," answered Mikoto gently, earning nods from Shisui and Itachi as well. Naruto considered himself lucky to have so many people go so far for his sake. He could only consider himself extremely blessed to have such people in his life, even if he didn't deserve their love and loyalty. "The enemy?" asked Naruto hesitantly. "Dead," answered Madara coldly. "Dead?" questioned Naruto in disbelief. "To the last man. We killed them all," replied Madara coldly, and for a second Naruto saw the immense hatred Madara had for the Otsutsuki and could only imagine how his brother must have butchered those bastards. Not that he was complaining. "The land of water?" he asked again. "Still exists. With the Otsutsuki wiped out, there was no need to destroy such an important territory. Contrary to our belief, it was not a wasteland. The Otsutsuki had their own crop fields, wealth and immense resources which we have seized for ourselves. Their lands are still fertile and I have put our men on them to alleviate the food shortage. Many refugees are already being moved there to lessen the burden on the land of fire. Thankfully, Nagato and Mito were able to stop the bijous from exploding. We just dodged a dangerous bullet," Naruto explained to Tajima honestly. The king was relieved. There was no point in destroying an entire resourceful continent if the enemy occupying them were all dead. He was also intrigued when Madara explained that the Uzumaki had uncovered several vaults of information that Hinata had about their world, the Otsutsuki, Jutsu and so much more. Tajima and Madara had already ordered those vaults to be preserved and guarded, knowing how important they would be in the future. The king was saddened to hear about the loss of half of the men who had followed him to the land of water. He felt guilty for being alive while they were not. The others tried to reassure him by explaining that he was more important, but it did not lessen his guilt, and his only comfort was that Madara had given all those warriors a state funeral and made sure their families were well looked after. Naruto decided to immortalize them forever so that humanity never forgot their sacrifice. The world was slowly recovering from the war, but it was not going to be an easy journey. Not for him or anyone else. But they had a chance, and in the end it was all that mattered. It was midnight when Tsunade entered her chambers and frowned when she saw her still recovering husband not only awake but also sitting at his table studying the ninja map while also taking down notes. "You should rest," she scolded, and flushed when he gave her a warm smile full of affection. "I cannot. Our world may have survived, but it will take a lot to rebuild and even more to make it ready to face the Otsutsuki clan," he emphasized patiently. She walked towards him and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You really have a one-track mind, don't you?" she asked with a mock sigh. "Afraid so," he answered cheekily with a grin. He calmly observed her as she studied the ninja map. It still amazed him that he now ruled over the world. It was a great responsibility he wanted to fulfill to his very best. But he couldn't shoulder this burden alone and wordlessly requested her guidance. Tsunade was surprised at his gesture before she smiled fondly. "If we are to keep peace, then we need to spread our loyalists across the world. Keeping the most powerful clans in the Land of Fire will only create more tension while weakening the security in other former nations," she advised, earning a nod from him. "What would you have me do?" he asked curiously, agreeing with her thoughts. "The Uchiha are strong and your ever-loyal supporters. Make them lords of the Land of Lightning. Those lands are very resourceful and rich, plus even more better suited at raising and training large armies. Have several minor clans like the Aburame and Shimura become their support houses along with local clans and civilians," explained Tsunade sincerely. "My people won't like it. The Land of Fire is our home," argued Naruto, and she even nodded in acceptance. "True. I would have recommended giving the Senju clan those lands, but my people are too soft and good-hearted. The citizens of Land of Lightning are a hard bunch who'll follow only the strong. Madara and his descendants will be the perfect choice if you deem it so. Most of all, you are the king. They will obey if you command them," explained Tsunade seriously, a fiery glint in her usual calm eyes. "What about the Land of Fire?" asked Naruto seriously, as much as he hated it her words did have a grain of truth in them. "It shall be the seat of the royal family with the Senju clan and its staunch allies like the Yamanaka, Akimichi and Inuzuka serving as loyal vassals. To balance the threat of favoritism, have the Hatake and Namikaze clans expand their influence. This way our descendants will always be surrounded by staunch loyalists. As for the Land of Wind, it is a treacherous and difficult nation. Only a smart tribe can lead them, and who better than the ever-cunning Nara? The Land of Earth is also a land of hard people. Make the Sarutobi clan their overlords with minor ninja houses as their support base. Besides, they always did love monkeys, which are aplenty in those lands, explained Tsunade strategically, pointing her fingers over different parts of the map. Naruto didn't miss the fact that she was gradually hinting at encroaching all smaller nations into Land of Fire, Lightning, Earth, and Sand. 4 great nations ruled by loyal families devoted to the royal family. All ninja clans and no civilians. The Land of Whirlpools should stay the way it is. The Uzumaki should be continued to rule over them. As for the Land of Water, we will need a stable population to repopulate them. People who have honor and courage, the samurai and Hanzo's people should be the most suitable. And these group of separate islands near the border of the Land of Fire and Water should be made another separate nation to act as a buffer state between the former Otsutsuki lands and the Land of Fire. You can give these lands to minor ninja clans and make it the seat of the crown prince. This way, our family will have a place to retreat to if shit hits the fan. By the time she was finished, her husband was gaping at her. What? She snapped irritatedly, her old temper flaring to life. She would never admit it out loud, but his continuous stare made her a little nervous. Her brothers had never allowed her to have much say in political matters, and she feared she might have overstepped her boundaries once more. To her surprise, he did something she had never expected. "You're a better ruler than me," he complimented, making her blush, but she quickly shook her head. "These are just ideas, Naruto," she refuted, albeit very weakly. It truly warmed her heart that he thought so highly of her. "They are better than the ones I had. To be honest, I know how to win wars, but one of the reasons we survived so far was on the sound advice Den Nara gave me from time to time. All my life, I was trained to fight my brother's wars. I was never born to lead a nation, much less the entire world. Sometimes, it makes me feel that I should not be the one leading us," he confessed, and was surprised when she bonked him on the head gently. "It doesn't matter what we were born to be or destined to be. Who we chose to become is what matters most, and no person is perfect at everything, even a king. You cannot do it all alone, but you will have all of us by your side every day. Don't be afraid," she encouraged. A smile came upon his lips as he stared at the unflinching faith she had in him, even if he was probably a political fool at times. "Thank you, Tsunade." She smiled back at him before laying a soft kiss on his lips, one which he happily returned. "Likewise, Naruto." They both decided to run their decided ideas before the various clans and their family elders first. If they agreed, then it would probably change the world forever. It was midnight. The world was silent. All creatures taking rest, unaware of the dangers that lurked around them. Priestess Shizuka stared at the shining moon in the sky. It was beautiful with its pale light, but what most people didn't see was its darkness that came and consumed the world. Every time, the light destroyed that darkness, but never was it easy. She looked at her 2 daughters sleeping in their cribs, innocent souls who didn't know how dangerous the world truly was. The monsters that lurked everywhere. She smiled when he felt another presence appear. "You came," she said gently. "Your words were true," he answered with a wistful smile, as she turned around to face the king. He was dressed in a simple Uchiha clan shirt and pants, a far cry from the expensive clothes many had gifted him on his coronation. And she knew very well what words he spoke about and why he was here. She watched his eyes gaze over their daughters and was pleased when she saw how much love he had in them for the girls. "Have you thought about their names?" she asked curiously. "I have. But you are their mother. I know you have forsaken most worldly pleasures, but if you have any ideas, then I would be most happy to listen," he said with a faint smile, but she shook her head. "I never expected to be a mother, but now that I am, I shall try my best to do justice by our daughters. But your blood flows in their veins. I shall be there for them as much as I can, but you are their father," she advised. Her unsaid words were not missed by the king as he nodded. "The eldest shall be named Naori and the younger one Hikari," he announced. "After your mother and aunt." "A predictable choice, but an honorable one as well," she commented, and he merely nodded. "I have to ask you something," he said, which made her smirk. "When we first met, I had answers to questions that you never knew existed. But tonight, you are the one with the answers and I with the questions." "You know it's true," she said frankly, which made him flinch. She saw him fight with his own heart for several long minutes before he sighed in defeat. "The war is far from over. It has only begun," he confessed. "Truth is always hard to accept, My king, she agreed, and saw him clench his fists. They're out there and my people need to prepare for their arrival. But we cannot do that without information, he admitted hesitantly. Shizuka felt her heart break for this man but couldn't help but admire his strength, for he had made his decision. Yet, she had to impart what she felt and reached out to touch his cheek. If you stay here, then you'll be remembered as the greatest of all kings. You will be a wonderful leader and possibly herald humanity into a new era. The young dragon, they shall remember you as such until the end of time. Your family will love you and you shall have the peace you always desired. But your people will never be safe from the real threat out there, and maybe in time, if it doesn't show itself, they will very well forget about it until it's too late. But if you go, then you shall wander through stars and entire galaxies. You will go farther than any man has ever dreamed of, a life of danger and hardship, but one that may save our world. But you will never have the peace you desire, possibly you shall never return home ever again. His shoulders slumped as he miserably approached his daughters and touched their cheeks. She could see the burden crushing his soul bitterly until he straightened himself and made his choice. I'm the only one who can cross worlds with my power. I can pass through dimensions and galaxies in time, to discover the true extent of the Otsutsuki power and warn our world in time. I cannot do that if I stay here and bind myself as king. I will never forgive myself for this, nor shall those who love me. I can only pray that my actions can help them when the time comes, he confessed miserably. Shizuka approached him and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder as he slowly took deep breaths. You remember what I told you about your final choice? She asked him. You shall die with a smile on your face. His eyes widened as he realized something very important. He took a step away from her, his voice deserting him as he nervously stared at this woman. Who are you? Suddenly a wave of deadly cold invaded the room. The flowers in the room withered away, the breathing of the children turned eerily silent as two ghostly dark black eyes stared at him. For the very first time, he saw a purple shadow rise above him, looming over the woman. He realized what it truly was. Death. I really died out there, didn't I? He asked sadly. The one and only God stared at him with his dark visage as the scene around them shifted. The palace disappeared, so did the land of fire, until Naruto found himself floating in the sky. He recognized the vast coastal lands below him as the land of water. Looking down, he saw a group of people surrounding a fallen warrior. Their hands desperately trying to breathe life back into the dead man. Their dead king. He saw Tsunade desperately crying for him to wake up, Madara fighting back his pain as he channeled more and more chakra in a vain effort to save his brother. There were others, Hatake, Nara, Sarutobi, Aburame, Shimura. All clans united in their effort to save one man. He felt his heart break on seeing them in so much pain, and knowing he had caused them only made it worse. Death is inevitable, child. It came to all those who came before you and all those who shall come after, announced Shizuka in her same calm voice, but he felt the darkness in her words. What was the point of making me see a life you were never going to give me? Asked Naruto furiously, as he felt his blood boil for vengeance. Shizuka stared at him calmly for a moment before looking back at the weeping people on the earth as their efforts started to fail them and the reality started to sink home. You had a destiny, Naruto. You were destined to bring all these clans together. Their unending clash would have resulted in the world's destruction, which would have wiped out mankind even before the Otsutsuki ever came. Eventually, it would have destroyed me as well, for even I cannot handle the souls of the entire world altogether, confessed Shizuka, or the death god. Naruto decided to call her Shizuka only, for calling her anything else disturbed him. What do you mean? He asked. Souls are energy and they can never be destroyed. They pass on through time in different shapes and forms. My job is to be their caretaker. Guide each and every one of them. Reward the good ones, take care of the simple ones and punish the wicked ones. But even I cannot destroy any soul altogether. They are eternal. Mortal death is just a small part of a great journey, but if the soul is destroyed, only the cold void awaits us all. I believe you have seen it a little, explained Shizuka honestly. Naruto remembered the darkness and feeling of nothingness he had seen when he had tried to force his rinnegan to gaze too far into the future. If the void was anything like that, then he wanted to be 1,000 miles away from it. Shizuka sadly smiled at him. The Otsutsuki are that void that shall consume every beautiful thing from this world. It shall forever be devoured by the void if they succeed. This war was just the first step in stopping that devastation. You united the world, and these people who care for you shall carry on your will. They shall do what is right, promised Shizuka. Naruto remembered small glimpses of the future he was shown. If even half of it was true, then Tsunade would possibly go ahead with her ideas regarding the Union. Madara would obey his dying wish of ruling over his region and looking after his nephew and nieces until they were fit to take charge. It would not be easy, but looking at the clan heads below and the same feeling in their eyes, Naruto could hope it turned out to be true. "You want something from me, don't you?" he asked knowingly, earning a sorrowful sigh from the priestess. "I do. The reason I showed you that future was because despite my wish of you helping me stop the Otsutsuki, I cannot force you. Naruto, you are a good soul who lived and died by its honor. It is my duty to assist you in your next journey where you may find peace, but even I do not know the future as many believe. You have to choose, to move on or linger and be the ghost of a dagger in the Otsutsuki's back. Your soul shall continue into a new life if you choose to move on, but if you linger then you shall be allowed freedom to pursue the Otsutsuki with some help from me. You may be alone but your actions might just save them all again," explained Shizuka. She flinched when he slammed a solid punch into her gut but nodded when she saw the look in his eyes. "You're a manipulative bastard," accused Naruto, earning a surprising nod in return. "We fight with the means we have defended, Shizuka. I suppose you cannot give me another chance at life for all the good I've done?" asked Naruto with a bitter laugh, as she sadly shook her head. "Death cannot be undone. Even if I allow you to return, you yourself made the right choice eventually through the small virtual simulation I put you through. Tell me what would be more cruel? That or this?" asked Shizuka, as she pointed at the weeping people on the ground as their efforts finally failed. Naruto watched their pain and could only imagine what worse pain he might have inflicted on them if he had returned from death, only to go away in search of the Otsutsuki and stop them. He was the only one with the power to reach them, wherever they were. He wanted to weep but remembered he had made his choice despite knowing where it would lead him. He had always fought for his people, no matter how much pain and suffering it got him in return. He died for them. Now, even dead, he had to protect them from the shadows. The path of a ninja. "Tell me, was Shizuka real or just another form of manipulation?" he asked, his concern for his daughters rising back. The woman smiled. "This is all but a vessel which I used to interact with you. The choice is you and she made on their own. Do not be afraid for your children. They shall be born and the three-headed dragon shall rise again," said Shizuka sincerely, as a wistful smile arrived on Naruto's face. "I wonder how they would be. I wonder how my son would grow when he faces the choice to be an Uchiha or a Senju," wondered Naruto. "He doesn't have to choose. He shall be an Uchiha and he shall be a Senju," she whispered. Naruto continued to smile while gazing at the soul he felt inside his wife's belly. In that moment, he felt that connection and the last shackles holding him were shattered. An energy so much like his own. Naruto is gone, but the young dragon is not. He nodded as the Shinigami extended his hand towards him. With one final glance at his family, he disappeared to fight his next war. 16 years later. Hashirama walked through the vast corridors of the royal palace, returning each of the greetings from the people nearby with a trained but honest smile. He even gave a nod to a few young Senju guards who saluted him as they passed by him. He took the stairs and soon reached the top of the tower where he found his last sibling. He smiled when he saw her standing tall and proud with her beautiful golden hair flowing freely in the air. The crown atop her head suited her and there was a soft smile on her face as she looked down into the courtyard. It was hard for him to believe that Queen Tsunade had barely aged even after these many years, even if she was nearly 32 years old. Unfortunately for her, he didn't come to her with good news. Still, she smiled warmly when she saw him and quickly they were embracing each other. He kissed her forehead affectionately and she gently caressed few of the wrinkles on his forehead. "You're getting old, brother," she teased with a cheeky grin, making him laugh. "Not everyone has your beauty," he answered defensively, as she relented with a smile. They both stepped towards the edge and Hashirama smirked when he saw several young boys and girls training in the courtyard. His eyes easily found his eldest son, Nawaki, practicing his fire-style jutsu. The boy was nearly 14 and was a good child, kind and caring. The future of the Senju was safe in him. His second son, Toburama, battled with his third son Atama. The twins of 12 were engaged in a fierce taijutsu match and had no intention of giving up anytime soon. Their blood-red hair a stark proof of their fiery nature, a trait they inherited from their mother, Mito. On the other side, two beautiful girls were practicing their own art. Unlike the Senju boys, they were extremely pale in complexion, giving them an unearthly visage. The elder one had dark black hair and sharp eyes. As the eldest among her siblings, Naruto Uchiha was every bit the warrior that her ancestors were. The other girl had beautiful and long brown hair, a trait she inherited from her father. Hikari Uchiha was busy executing her set of sealing jutsu while trying to fight off her warrior elder sister. Even in the midst of battle, she was smiling cheerfully, unlike her sister who had a look of utter concentration on her determined face. But his breath nearly stopped when he saw one young warrior fighting against three of the most famous ninja of their time. Shisui, Itachi and Mikoto Uchiha had all gotten older. A lot had changed in their lives, including the marriage of Shisui and Mikoto, while Itachi chose the path of solace. What they never gave up on was their promise of protecting and nurturing their family. It was why they surrounded a young boy with their swords bared. The boy lunged forward with the legendary sword Dawn in his hands. His handsome blonde hair whistled in the air as he clashed his blade against Shisui with a loud sound. His sharp bluish eyes saw the next attack coming as he used a kunai to block Mikoto's strike. He was broad-shouldered and strong, only a little shorter in height than the 6 feet tall Shisui. He was strong as he held his ground even when both Kingsguard pushed him back and created a shadow clone without any hand seals that blocked Itachi from striking him from behind. Hashirama could not help but feel sorrow and pride well in his chest, as he saw his nephew push off Shisui and Mikoto with a fierce battle cry. The Senju leader didn't miss Tsunade smiling with pride as her son demonstrated her monstrous strength in battle. Itachi had to jump away quickly for the clone blocking his way to his real target exploded. The young prince lunged after his enemies with a ferocity that Hashirama had only seen in very few warriors. He looked so much like his father, commented Hashirama, as he saw the pale complexion of the prince. The shape of his hair was the same as his father's, but he was far more muscular and tall. His face almost the same as the first Dragon King, right down to the very bottom of his lips. They call him the young dragon, whispered Tsunade, pride and sadness mixed in her eyes. She had surprised nearly everyone when she chose to name the boy herself. Hashirama had been worried for her safety when the king died, but Tsunade made a lasting positive impression on Madara and the remaining Uchiha with one simple decision by naming her son after their beloved fallen king. A happy smile came on her lips as she saw her son corner Itachi and Mikoto, while Shisui observed him with a nostalgic look in his eyes. Naruto. The 16-year-old boy looked up at his mother's call, and his previously fierce look instantly changed into a beaming smile as he ignored all caution and started rushing upwards across the tower wall with a grin. Within seconds, he reached upstairs and Hashirama opened his eyes with a beaming smile. Uncle Hashirama. Tsunade smiled on seeing her brother hug her only son. Even now, she couldn't help but witness how similar the boy was to his father. But unlike the martyred king, his son grew up in an era of peace. In many ways, Naruto was similar to his father. He was a great swordsman, the wielder of the Sharingan, a fine commander in training and a leader who took the safety and well-being of his people very seriously. But he was also joyous, honorable and full of life. His smiles always reached his eyes and he always lived life to its fullest. A luxury his father never experienced. A happiness his father gave his life to pass on. Watching that innocence and hope on her young son's face made Tsunade bitterly respect why her husband gave his life without hesitation. She had nearly given up on life when she failed to revive Naruto, but her family supported her. Both her families. She had expected Madara to curse her for her failure in saving his brother, but the Uchiha had seen something in her and in his own strange way encouraged her to fight on, if only for the sake of her son and his nephew. And he was right. For this boy became not just her salvation, but Madara's as well. It had taken only one look at the crying infant for both her and Madara. That moment had broken their hearts but also breathed new life into it. She had imagined of so many names for her child, but the first time she looked at him, only one name came to her. Naruto. When she had suggested it to her loved ones, Madara had lowered his head, fighting back his tears, and whispered, "Thank you," in a choked voice. The Dragon King was gone, but Naruto Uchiha was not. Hashirama created an entire new grove of flowers at the foot of the giant statue that stood as tall as the royal palace and watched over the entire capital. Instead of stone, he had created it from pure wood. Unbreakable. It was a perfect picture of their fallen king. He stood tall and proud, with his traditional golden armor bearing the three-headed dragon sigil. His right arm held a massive wooden sword, a pale imitation of dawn, and his face set in eternal determination and courage. Beneath it were just written 5 words. The young dragon, forever young. Looking at his nephew standing by his side reminded Hashirama of the time when he had united his clan with the Uchihas and marched to war under King Naruto. Now another Naruto stood beside him, The boy solemnly stared at the statue of a father he had never known but had heard great tales about from every person he had ever known. Despite their differences, humanity had acknowledged King Naruto for his ultimate sacrifice, and even till this day he was cherished as a prized hero. A legacy his young son found hard to live up to. What killed him? Asked Naori, the eldest of the deceased king's children. Hashirama was aware that the girl knew how Naruto died, but her question held a deeper meaning. One which he understood far better than anyone else. Loyalty, answered the Senju head solemnly. He watched Naori clench her fists without betraying any emotion on her stoic face. But her solemn eyes showed the pain in her heart, but as the eldest of her siblings she remained strong. Hikari, the middle child, was more open with her emotions. She had her father's face in his eyes, those very beautiful orbs that were very moist on the anniversary of her father's death. What was he like? Our mother never talks about him, nor does Queen Tsunade, whispered Hikari sadly. Hashirama could understand why those two women behaved as such. Tsunade never admitted it, but Hashirama knew she held herself responsible for not being able to save her husband's life. His death broke something in her, much to Hashirama's sorrow. It did make her strong enough to become a queen that kept the world at peace for 16 years and raise her son alone, but she never remarried or found someone to care for except her only son. Priestess Shizuka left behind all worldly pleasures, even leaving her own daughters in the care of Madara, who accepted the responsibility to honor the memory of his beloved brother. The two women were never the same after Naruto's death and avoided talking about him to resist stirring up painful memories from the past. It always made the three children curious about their father. They had heard stories about his conquests and victories, his struggles and defeats, and ultimately his death. But they never knew the kind of person Naruto was, which truly saddened Hashirama. He was a good man until his last breath, the finest person I ever knew. He felt things deeply than others, he was brave and honorable but with a sharp mind. He never wanted to be king. Admitted Hashirama with a smile, as he recalled the reluctance he had seen in Naruto's mind when they all choose him as their king. I find that hard to believe, muttered Prince Naruto with a frown, as he stared at his father with doubt ever present in his eyes. It was no secret to Hashirama that his nephew felt small in comparison to the deeds of his father. Your refusal will not change the type of your man your father was, Naruto. He was the best commander I ever followed into battle. He united the world and brought an end to the clan wars era. He fought and defeated the Otsutsuki to save the world from extinction and tyranny. The peace our people and their families enjoy is because of your father's action and sacrifice, reprimanded Hashirama, but not unkindly. Prince Naruto clenched his fist while glaring at his father's statue. And what about us, Uncle Hashirama? Our family? Mother never found the love she deserved, my sisters and I never got to know our father. Uncle Madara is always so distant despite how much he tries. Believe me, I understand the desire to keep our people safe. As prince, their lives and well-being are my responsibility. But I also owe something to my family and loved ones. How can a man choose between the two? Asked Prince Naruto hesitantly. Hashirama saw the same question also present in Naori and Hikari's eyes. He had to remind himself that these children had Uchiha blood in them, and like their ancestors they felt emotions more deeply than others. It was necessary to make them understand before they went off in the wrong direction. Madara told me that he once heard King Naruto say that loyalty was easy to give, but hard to follow through upon. It may be hard for you three to understand, but your father considered not just you all, but entire humanity as his family. You may think he died for the sake of strangers, but his actions were always aimed at also protecting the ones closest to his heart. Your father faced a difficult path, and even so Naruto fought honorably until the very end. He never gave up, he never complained, he always led from the front. My dear nephew, it is easy to speculate over possibilities when we already know the outcome, but in every man's life there will come a day when they must make a choice. One day it will come to you as well, just as it came to your father. I hope you are strong enough to make the right decision when the time comes, advised Hashirama. Hashirama saw his nephew longingly stare at the statue, seeking answers and warmth that should have been his by right but was never received by him. It was why he and Madara had tried their best to be there for these children, but for all their efforts and affection, they couldn't replace these children's real father. In many ways, Naruto had inherited the best and worst from his parents. Like Tsunade, he was very open with his feelings and often easy to anger. But like his father, he truly cared about his siblings, his family and his people. He could still remember the day when a 13-year-old Prince Naruto had rode off to war alongside Madara and his sisters to crush several factions desperate to revive the clan wars era. Tsunade had objected vehemently, her fear of losing another loved one close to her nearly overpowering her judgment. But she was proven wrong. The rebels were propagating to the masses that they were being ruled by a broken woman and a young boy. They claimed that the alliance between Uchiha and Senju was about to break, leading the world into chaos. Their desperate attempts were proven futile when Naruto and his sisters descended upon them with 10,000 Uchiha and Senju fighters, and their bannermen. Nauri had inherited her father's mind for war and had guided her younger siblings under Madara's tutelage. Hikari and Naruto had followed the advice of their eldest sibling and uncle, which ultimately led them to victory. It was there that the prince earned his Sharingan when one of the rebels nearly killed Hikari. For that aggression, Naruto butchered them to the last man, giving no quarter to even the desperate few that tried to surrender in the end. That day, 3 years ago, and amidst a battlefield full of corpses, that the world accepted that the three-headed dragon was still strong. There were many veterans of the Otsutsuki War who had fought alongside the prince, and watching him battle had reminded him of their lost king. His victory only increased morale, even to the extent that the people bestowed the same title upon Prince Naruto that they had given to his father. The young dragon. "I miss him," confessed Hikari, earning a comforting hand on each of her shoulder from her other two siblings. Hashirama wistfully smiled as the girl's gentle heart reminded him of his own little brother, Itama. Gods, had it been so long? He could barely remember the faces of his brothers, the sound of their voices, and only knowing that their sacrifice didn't go in vain gave him little solace. "Where do you think he's now, Uncle Hashirama?" asked Naruto hesitantly, making Hashirama stare at the statue with a faint smile. "Knowing him, he's off leading another war." It was dark. The thundering clouds roared from the skies, the angry sparks of lightning often falling on barren land, scarring it even more. The ghostly winds howled wildly, echoing the lost voices of all the souls who were forgotten. The world was dying. On top of a lonely mountain, 5 shadows lurked in the darkness, observing the massive camp sprawled across the decaying lands. The sun had deserted this world, and so had the stars. Even the moon was swallowed by the clouds, leaving this world in eternal darkness. Whoever had lived in these lands had long since passed, and one touch at the soil was enough to make one understand that the end of this world was near. "Look at the size of their camp," whispered the first man. All 5 of them were garbed in dark swirling shadows that covered them from neck to the legs. It was a gift bestowed upon them to help them accomplish their duty. Their faces always hidden behind demonic masks provided to them by their master. They were ghosts. "How many of them are there?" asked the second man, his voice as stoic as ever despite what his eyes showed him. 300,000, perhaps. "Brother," whispered the third one worriedly, earning a sharp look from the previous man. "I told you not to call me that, fool." "Not out here," hissed the white-haired man, his demonic mask thankfully hiding most of his furious expression, much to the relief of the younger man beside him. Thankfully, the other 2 black-haired comrades of theirs didn't care enough to get involved. But the one who had stayed silent so far did the opposite. "It's been 16 years, Tobirama." The said man removed his mask, leading to their other comrades doing the same. In the end, their blonde-haired leader cast aside his own mask, revealing his perfectly bearded face and sharp eyes. Even if one looked at him closely, they would find it hard to recognize him as Naruto Uchiha, the young dragon. He was nothing but a ghost now, just like the rest of them. Tobirama glared at his younger brother, Itama, who had the grace to blush at his mistake. Kagami and Takeshi Uchiha grinned at the banter, which earned a faint smile from the deceased king even as they all watched the grave thread in front of them. "I often forget who we were. It's good to remember, even if only for a little while," whispered the king wistfully. "It took us so long to follow the clues. So many dead planets, so many barren worlds, and now we finally see what's coming for our people," said Takeshi bitterly. Tobirama frowned at the anger in the Uchiha's voice. Even in death, Takeshi was a hot-headed soul. But for all his faults, Tobirama admired the man's loyalty to his friend and king. Takeshi and Kagami chose to linger on, to keep on fighting and risking their very existence getting destroyed, to keep aiding their king in the final war. Tobirama had made the opposite choice and had been about to ascend to the next life when he learned about Itama's decision to follow Naruto in his mission to stop the Otsutsuki. Truthfully, Tobirama thought they had done enough, even giving their lives for mankind. But now, after so many years of witnessing the destruction the Otsutsuki had left across the universe, of the scale of destruction and tragedy they had left behind, and witnessing their true power before his very eyes, he had made the correct decision to protect his younger brother and aid his king in this mission. "What do we do?" asked Kagami curiously. "The people need to know," answered Naruto honestly. We have constantly left behind messages about the Otsutsuki's movements. It may take a year or two for those messages to reach our world, but it should give our people ample time to prepare, suggested Itama, but Naruto shook his head. We cannot depend on that. Now that we know the Otsutsuki's strength, we need to prepare them ourselves before it's too late. Itama and Takeshi called the king. The two warriors straightened up on hearing the ironclad voice of their king. Itama, contact the Senjus and their allies. Takeshi, do the same with the Uchiha and their bannermen. We cannot leave anything to chance. Make sure our people are ready, and I, Tobirama and Kagami shall do everything in our power to buy them as much of that precious time as we can, ordered the king. None of his four comrades objected and only gave him grave but determined nods in return. King Naruto stared at the army before him. He had seen what kind of devastation they left behind on each world, he had seen the terrifying power these Otsutsuki had. Hinata had been right about that, at least, the Otsutsuki of Earth were a pale imitation of the ones before him. And there were so many of them. Yet he had witnessed the way they fought, the way they waged war, the way they butchered their enemies. It took him 16 years, but he never gave up. He and his comrades trailed after them like ghosts, observing them from afar, and never made contact no matter what. I cannot even remember home anymore. My wife and children. He thought sadly, as all he could remember were her blonde hair and dazzling smile along with 3 loud crying babies. He looked at his comrades, and just like him they were torn as they tried to remember the home they had fought for so long, the people for whom they had forsaken a chance to move on for. None of them could remember the things most important to them, but they very well remembered the massive slaughter they had witnessed for so many years across the universe. They were ghosts. He watched as Itama and Takeshi got up, giving him firm salutes as his eye opened up a space-time dimension that would take them back home. Considering how far they were, it would take them another 3 years to reach Earth. He glanced at his remaining 2 comrades with a determined gaze. We delay their advance, he decided, as he lifted a dark black-colored sword that was capable enough of killing living and even the dead. A gift from death itself. Won't be easy, warned Kagami, but nonetheless he too lifted a similar sword and prepared himself. 3 ghosts against 300,000 or more. We stand alone, Naruto said, Tobirama frankly, never mincing any words, but was surprised when a faint smile came across the fallen king's face. Not alone. Naruto bit his thumb, breaking frozen blood out of his dead skin, and placed them upon a skeleton tattoo on his left arm. It's time. Tobirama and Kagami were both surprised when another space-time dimension opened around them. At first nothing happened, but then a massive wave came forth until so many corporeal forms were standing in front of them. Most of them were humans, but majority of them had their faces covered in black masks. Cursed souls, destined to do the Shinigami's bidding. But there were more than a few hundred humans with white masks covering their faces. Pure souls, that had voluntarily chosen to fight this war. Tobirama took great satisfaction when he saw quite a few of the dark souls had pale white eyes. The only thing that gave their identity away as the Otsutsuki that were butchered in the last war. It gave the Senju immense pleasure to see those vermin being punished in this way. There were others in the army as well. Summoning creatures of all sorts, and one of them stood out from the rest. The pitch-black dragon lowered itself, allowing its master to take up position on top. Tobirama grinned and Kagami smiled when the king looked at them with a fierce gaze. For mankind. Hashirama waited at the gates of the capital alongside a large retinue which included most of his family and even the royal family. They were patiently waiting for the man to arrive. The most excited among their group were none other than Naori and Hikari. After all, their adoptive father was about to arrive. He was brought out of his thoughts when he felt the mass of chakra signatures emerging from the forest. Hundreds of Northmen came charging forth, all wearing traditional armor of many well-known clans. Hashirama instantly spotted the Shimura warriors, alongside many Aburame, but most numerous of them were the Uchiha. It still astonished him that Tsunade's decision to split off the clans across the elemental nations had worked so well. His sister had done well in bestowing the Land of Lightning to the Uchiha clan and their bannermen. Truth be told, it was a wise decision, as their firm ideology and iron fist had made peace prevail in those lands. A tactic that would have not worked in the gentle and more liberal Land of Fire, something which the Senjus and their allies were easily able to manage. The new arrivals were not alone, as the Sarutobi from the Land of Earth marched alongside them. So did the Naras from the Land of Wind. Even Uzumaki from the Land of Whirlpool and Samurai from the Land of Water were marching towards the gates. Even a small party from the Dragonlands, the seat of the prince, was approaching. Prince Naruto smiled on seeing his best friend leading the small group. Sasuke Uchiha, son of Shisui and Mikoto Uchiha, grinned as he was the first to reach the gates and was quickly engulfed by the prince in a fierce brotherly hug. The fact that the boy looked quite similar to Madara's deceased little brother Izuna only reminded Hashirama of the hope they had instilled in their world. Finally, the skies darkened and Hashirama smirked as he arrived. People gasped when the familiar visage of the demonic bull-headed Susanoo graced the capital once more. Madara Uchiha had not lost any of his dangerous aura, even if most of his days were spent maintaining order across the land of lightning as its ruling lord. Prince Naruto again smiled as the Susanoo landed, and two people emerged. One was his grim-faced dear uncle and the other was one of his dearest cousins. Izuna Uchiha, son of Madara Uchiha, was 3 years younger than his cousin. He was wearing black armor that matched his dark hair and eyes, his skin pale like most of his clansmen, and like his father he too held a gun by at his back. Only the gods knew which woman had given Madara a son, as the man himself never revealed that secret to anyone including his own family. Hashirama watched Prince Naruto and Izuna approach each other before the older brother sized up the younger one with a smirk. "You're still in black," teased Naruto. Hashirama didn't miss the fleeting look of sorrow that passed Madara's eyes on hearing those words before he reined in his emotions and watched his own son shrug. "Still better than yours," answered Izuna with a grin. Tsunade smiled on watching her son hug his favorite cousin even as Madara and Hashirama did the same, albeit more quickly in order to not gather any more attention. She waited another few minutes, exchanging respectful greetings made to her by various lords, including Hiruzen Sarutobi, who was the new leader of the Land of Earth. The same greetings were extended to her by a smiling Nagato Uzumaki, and old Mifune, while Shikaku Nara, son of Den Nara and new leader of Land of Wind, gave her a lazy bow. Tsunade presided over the formal meeting and watched every person present in the room. Most of them were men and women she had known her entire life, but there were many new faces as well. They were so young, but in them she saw hope for the future. It made her bitterly understand and remember why her husband sacrificed himself. Looking at these young children, the future leaders of their world, she could only pray they never saw the horrors that their parents did and could build upon the legacy their ancestors left behind. She had tried her best to rebuild their world from ashes, knowing Naruto would have wanted her to look after their people. She was lucky to some extent, since the world was ravaged by war and destruction. Most people were desperate to rebuild their lives and ready to rally behind any who provided that stability. The Uchiha Senju alliance was their best hope, so the world followed the two clans with hope in their hearts. It took nearly a decade to repair the damage left behind by the Otsutsuki, and even so the world still had many scars from the last war. Only now their economy was getting back on its feet, human population which had been massacred was now slowly growing again, people were finally able to find some luxury in their lives after years of scarcity in terms of resources. Most of all, the people were still in the process of accepting the destruction the last war had wreaked on them. Many ninja clans had gone extinct, even the Uchiha and Senju had reached the point of annihilation. It was why she had encouraged humanity to have more children. It would not only help them regain their lost numbers, but also make them capable enough to face any threats, and in a way these children had brought a new light in the lives of Tsunade's generation that had known nothing but war and misery. It had healed some of the pain they felt for all they had lost. She looked at her own son and felt pride along with sadness sweep her heart. Naruto was sitting beside her and was carefully interacting with Hiruzen and Nagato. Watching him laugh at something Hiruzen said brought a smile on her face. But it also made her worried about her only child. He was a good boy, if a little strange at times, just like his father. She had never imagined her son inheriting so much of his father's looks or live his life on few of the principles which her husband had lived and died by. He had displayed those traits very directly when he ignored her pleadings and had marched to war a few years ago against the rebels. Just like King Naruto, his son who bore the same name couldn't sit back and watch threats being made against his people. Her son had ignored the advice of his eldest stepsister as well. Princess Nauri was good at war and had displayed her skill quite a few times during the rebellion war. She had advised her only brother to not lead from the front at the risk of his own life, and the girl had been right. Naruto was the only heir to the throne. He carried both Uchiha and Senju blood in him, a part of both families that indirectly also earned him the loyalty of the bannermen of both great clans. It was that power that had kept the world at peace. If something happened to him, then that alliance would shatter. Tsunade had to remind herself that the only way the war between those two clans had been stopped was through her marriage to King Naruto. It was why she had to keep her son safe for as long as she lived, not just as his mother but also as Queen of the Seven Nations. "Lord Madara, may I ask as to why you called for this meeting?" asked Shikaku Nara, bringing Tsunade out of her thoughts and glance at her quiet brother-in-law. The years had changed the eldest son of Tajima Uchiha. Tsunade could not help but sympathize with the veteran Uchiha who had lived an even tougher life than hers and many other people in the room. He lost 3 brothers during the clan's wars era, witnessed the demise of his 4th and last brother along with most of his clan during the Otsutsuki War, was left alone with the responsibility of leading the Uchiha and their bannermen when Lord Tajima died a year later after the end of the Otsutsuki War, swallowed by grief over the death of his sons, his sister and most of his clan. She had felt extremely guilty of handing over the control of the Land of Lightning to Madara when he was at his lowest. She had feared he would lash at her out for trying to throw his remaining people and bannermen from the Land of Fire, which had always been their home. But to her surprise, Madara had seen reason and had accepted her decision and went north. He untied those lands and its people, helped them rebuild their lives along with repopulating the Uchiha clan by having a son of his own and encouraging others to do the same. Madara had been the first to answer the call when Prince Naruto had called his banners against the rebels and had made sure the young boy and his sisters returned from the war alive. In a way, Tsunade guessed Madara was desperate not to lose the last legacy of his beloved brother. Her decision to split off the most powerful clans across the world had worked much to her surprise. But then again, she had only given command of various nations to only the most loyal clans. It would be up to her son and his descendants of future to make sure they remained loyal every generation. It would not be an easy task, but it was the best solution she could come up with at that time all those years ago. The Land of Lightning, the northernmost nation of the world, was ruled by the Uchiha with the support of their bannermen. It was the second largest nation after the Land of Fire and was the military powerhouse of humanity. Some of their finest warriors had emerged from that nation under Madara's command. The Land of Earth, ruled by the Sarutobi clan, was rich in minerals and resources. That had proved extremely beneficial for the growth of humanity. The Sarutobi were men of honor and strength, something which the people of Land of Earth respected. They ruled those lands with the support of minor ninja clans and had a decent industry and military force. The Land of Wind was a different story. Lacking most critical resources and military strength, it was the weakest among all nations. Its people lived a tough life and were the most dangerous. It was why she had tasked the Nara clan to rule those lands. Their intelligence and cunning had kept the most problematic enemies at bay, but even then the rebellion had started from those lands. Thankfully, the other nations had understood the plight of the Naras, and when Prince Naruto called his banners for their aid, the full might of the other 6 nations descended upon the rebel forces, crushing them completely. The Nara clan was doing well in rebuilding the nation after that conflict, but tensions were still high there. The Land of Fire was the wealthiest and most prosperous among all nations. It was not just the breadbasket of the world with its rich fertile lands, but also contained the most precious of resources in forms of gold, diamonds, and even iron. The Senju ruled most of the nation with the support of their bannermen, and only the capital along with its surrounding lands were ruled by the royal family. Hashirama had maintained the peace and helped his people prosper. The population of this nation was the highest along with its economy, which was why it had the largest military force in the world. The Land of Water, previously home to the now deceased Otsutsuki clan and their allies, had long been shrouded in misery. But when Tsunade gave those lands to the samurai and Hanzo's followers, it finally brought peace to those lands. While not as prosperous as the Land of Fire or military strong like the Land of Lightning and Earth, the Land of Water was stable enough with a growing economy and a decent army of honor-bound samurai. The Land of Whirlpools, ruled by the Uzumaki, was also a prosperous and wealthy nation. The Uzumaki clan had rebuilt their lands with vigor and determination, and their lands were considered to be the home of some of the most intellectual people of the world. The Uzumaki clan had developed the world in leaps with their military as well as civilian innovations. It had earned them great wealth and fame, along with envy. But for now, they were stable, and while not a powerhouse in terms of military power, they were still important for growth and peace across the world. The Dragonlands was the smallest among all nations. They were a group of 50 large and small islands off the coast of the Land of Fire and Water. While not as prosperous as other nations, it was home to the largest naval and merchant fleets of the world. It was under the direct rule of the royal family and seat of the crown prince. Those islands were thankfully able to sustain themselves, and their trade fleets had provided very valuable services to various nations. It had earned quite a lot of wealth for Tsunade and her son, while their naval fleet had proven quite helpful during the rebellion by providing crucial logistical support while also transporting warriors from far-off nations like the Land of Water. Somehow, these 7 nations had helped humanity find its feet again after the Otsutsuki War and given them all the stability and peace they desperately needed. But Tsunade also remembered that peace was fragile and fleeting. One wrong move could ignite the sparks of war once more. Most of humanity considered her to be one of the most intelligent rulers in history, but in truth she had only used a page from her deceased husband's war strategies. She had been by Naruto's side when he delegated command to various officers and family members during the war. He had always chosen the most loyal ones to lead while always delegating the most intelligent or cunning ones in advisory positions. A clear example of that fact was him choosing Madara to lead half of his army during the Otsutsuki War, while delegating secondary command to a shrewd Tobirama Senju. Tsunade had mimicked her husband's decisions and chosen the most loyal lords to rule and keep peace across the world. But she always stayed vigilant, keeping careful eye on all of them, including the Senju clan, for the hearts of men were always uncertain. She had not tried to micromanage any of the nations apart from the Dragonlands, which was under her direct rule. She had allowed her loyal lords to rule their lands with their own philosophy while providing aid when required. It had earned her the respect and loyalty of the lords sitting in this room, while making her extremely beloved to the common population, for it was due to her decisions that they got peace. She could only hope her son could keep this peace after she was gone, but she planned to help him be ready for his responsibility. 3 years ago, the Uchiha clan received a message that unexplainably was etched into one of our holy shrines, said Madara hesitantly, as if the very words were still alien to him. What did the message say? Asked Hiruzen Sarutobi, echoing everyone's thoughts. They are coming. The room froze. Tsunade herself controlled her emotions while gauging those of the other lords and their children. Most seemed shocked, some younger clan heirs even disbelieving. Even her own son seemed skeptical of his uncle's claims, something he never often did. It could be a hoax, Lord Madara. Even the Otsutsuki records we found in the Land of Water estimated the one true enemy's arrival at least a few more decades later, argued Shikaku Naru defensively, but Tsunade already saw the gears turning in the sharp man's mind. Madara nodded, if a bit reluctantly, his grim mood becoming even more darker. An expression mirrored by his own son. At first, I thought so. Someone's poor attempt to plunge our world back into the flames of war, but a few months later another message appeared. This one providing images of a world that is not ours, said Madara hesitantly. His son, Izuna, got up from his seat and distributed a few pictures across the room. When Tsunade received a copy, she had to again control her emotions. Before her was the image of a snowy world ruined by war. Even from this brief picture she could see the lands were devastated to the point of beyond return. The very earth itself was dying alongside the corpses of strange little bug-like creatures that were never before seen on Earth. Another picture was passed to her, and this one took her breath away. 5 shadows in the shape of humans were present on the very same destroyed snowy world. Their faces and bodies hidden by masks and shadow-like cloaks, but she felt her heart stop on seeing one of them having blonde hair and another with pale white hair. Her gaze caught Madara, followed by Hashirama's and then her own son, all of whom were shocked. Few of them look very similar, Madara said Hashirama hopefully. I didn't want to believe it at first, but another message came a year later, and this time it had information about the numbers in the enemy's vanguard, their battle tactics, and along with some of their strengths. It's beyond anything the majority of our ninjas can handle, confessed Madara, as he handed off the last images in his possession. It carried a last message as well. They come. We shall do what we can, for as long as we can, to buy you time. Unite and face them, or mankind shall perish like the inhabitants of destroyed worlds across the universe. By now, the room had gone deathly silent. If this is true, whispered Hiruzen, a small hint of fear creeping into his voice. Then we're fucked. I am hard-pressed to consider this to be true, as the technology of photography is still being perfected by my clan and would take another year before we can pass it on the world. Either our supposed allies stole this technology and are helping us out, or this is another rebel faction looking to create discontent and anarchy, explained Nagato, much to the distress of the other ninja leaders. Madara, is this who I think it is? Asked Tsunade hesitantly, her gaze still affixed on the blonde man and the one with white hair. Even the one with brown hair seemed to hit something in her heart. King Naruto was the only one in our world with the ability to move across time and space. I can think of no one other than my brother with the power and will to do what is right for his people. Even after death, answered Madara, pride easily present in his voice along with sadness and hope. This man beside the king looks like Tobirama, and this one like Atama, proposed Hashirama, a smiling etching across his face. The other two seem like Kagami and Takeshi. But we cannot be sure, whispered Mikoto in surprise, earning a nod from her husband Shisui as well. I don't think any of this is true. These men are dead, and we have never tried something horrible like the Otsutsuki had done to bring them back. The samurai are of the belief that this is the evil desire of chaotic shinobi wishing to start another war by playing at our feelings. I must say they are pretty smart as they are hitting you all where it hurts most, family warned Mifune, earning a nod from Hanzo as well. That seemed to dampen the spirits of most people in the room, as hard rationality and reality threatened to crush the faint hopes once more. It is true, my queen. Our world is not ready for war and the civilians will revolt against us if we threaten their peace with another conflict. The memory of the rebellion is still fresh in many hearts and might just erupt into an inferno if we make hasty decisions, warned Shikaku Nara. Tsunade was about to argue when her son slowly got up from his seat, attracting everyone's gaze. He looked at her for permission and she saw the keen desire to take charge of this situation. She hesitated, wondering if it was the right choice, but in the end consented because if this information was true then Naruto would have to lead their race just as his father had in the last war, who still fought for their well-being even after death. You're right, Lord Shikaku and Lord Mifune. Our peace is too fragile and our subjects too hesitant for another war. In that sense, I can understand not making any hasty decisions, said Prince Naruto, his voice every bit like his father's had been. Madara seemed disappointed and was about to protest when his nephew looked directly at him. But we also cannot dismiss this threat lightly. We all know that the Otsutsuki shall come to destroy our world, it may be now or a few decades later, but every evidence we have shows one harsh truth: they are coming, argued Prince Naruto, earning a grim nod from Madara and his son. Even Hashirama relented after a few long moments. Then what do you want us to do, my prince? Questioned Hiruzen seriously. Call the banners. Shocked gasps escaped across the room, Suan's among them. Only Madara grinned with barely hidden pride visible across his grim face. All of them? Asked a distressed Shikaku Nara, already imagining the backlash this would cause across the ever unstable land of wind. No. That would be too risky, start with preparing your own individual clansmen first. If we discover more merit to this threat, only then we can escalate this to a full-scale crisis. A small military buildup would not raise much questions considering the memories of the rebellion is still fresh in many minds. We should also prepare our economy for war. With winter coming we can justify this as a preventive action in stopping scarcity of food, water and critical resources. In the meanwhile, I shall form a small elite force that would investigate this threat. I would request all of your support by providing me the finest men and women from your families. Tsunade was stunned. She watched many faces across the room and she was not alone in her feelings. Madara and Hashirama seemed proud of their nephew, so was Hiruzen Sarutobi, for they were men who understood war better than others in the room. Meanwhile, Lord Shikaku, Lord Nagato and Lord Mifune seemed conflicted, already imagining the ramifications behind this move. In this moment, she could clearly see her son had inherited both hers and his father's traits. He led from the front but also had an understanding of human hearts and minds, characteristics passed on by his mother and father. But, just because he was thinking on the right path didn't mean that others would agree with his judgment. People had followed King Naruto because their very existence was threatened. Now, having endured a long peace, few were opposed to going back to the old days of war. I'm sorry to say this, but you're being too hasty, my prince. The samurai do not agree with this decision. I cannot in good conscience allow my people to be a part of this, replied Mifune flatly, making Tsunade clench her fists and many eyes to harden for the open defiance. To everyone's surprise, Prince Naruto smiled. A cold and ruthless smile. That is your right, Lord Mifune. But if war truly comes to our world, then I will not raise a single sword in the defense of the land of water. Nor can I continue to allow the subsidies the crown has granted your people over the years any longer, considering you are not inclined to defend your fellow men, said Prince Naruto coldly, hard eyes remaining steady even as the furious and cold gaze of the samurai leader gazed upon him. We served your father, boy. The subsidies you grant us are not out of the goodness of your heart, but because your mother took the ancestral lands of my people and ordered us to populate the land of water. We served your father, and then your mother loyally without question. Is this how you reward loyalty? Asked Mifune fiercely. Naruto clenched his jaw and was about to give a befitting reply, but his eldest sister cut him off. My father always believed that the samurai were honorable, more loyal, said Naori pointedly. Madara smiled at his niece's harsh words, struck Mifune deeply. For all their faults, the samurai were a proud people. Having raised the girl and her sister, he knew Naori may have inherited Naruto's mind for war, but in many ways her temperament was just like Madara's. The same could not be said of her younger sister, who was of a more gentle heart, a fact she displayed as she looked at Mifune with hopeful look that could have melted even the most hardened men. My brother does not wish war upon your people, But only the samurai and shinobi together were able to stop Hinata Otsutsuki. The way we think are different, but in the end we are all human. We must stay united, Lord Mifune urged Hikari gently. Mifune glanced at the other lords and saw most didn't agree with him but the prince. A few like Shikaku who had doubts were smart enough to keep their doubts to themselves. He then looked at Hanzo, and his old friend gave him a careful nod which made Mifune sigh. The samurai have followed the crown loyally for years, we will not break faith today, declared Mifune reluctantly, but made sure to intently stare at the prince, making sure to let the boy know that he would be held personally responsible and suffer repercussions if he dragged the samurai into a needless conflict. Thankfully, the boy gave a curt but respectful nod in return, which was much better than giving false promises which he couldn't keep. Northern families are loyal, Naruto. They'll fight for you if you want, promised Madara, earning a wide smile from his nephew. So shall the South and all its families, promised Hashirama fiercely, earning a grateful nod from Tsunade. The land of earth stands behind you, my prince pledged Hiruzen honestly. Troublesome, I don't like it but needs to be done. I'll rally what support I can for my troublesome lands, just don't be too hasty, my prince said Shikaku hesitantly, earning chuckles from many in the room including the prince. I don't need to say this but the Dragonlands shall stand behind you, promised Sasuke Uchiha with a smirk, earning a smile from his mother Mikoto and a tired sigh from his father Shisui at the boy's dramatic and informal pledge. All eyes turned upon Nagato Uzumaki, who gave a faint smile to the prince. You remind me of your father, my prince. In many ways you are like him, but I see some of your mother in you as well. We are kin by blood and the Uzumaki owe your father a debt we can never repay. We shall support our family like we always have, promised Nagato with a smile. Tsunade watched her only son with pride and fear in her heart as he gave a respectful nod to all those who had supported his decisions. Her heart nearly broke when Izuna Uchiha got up from his seat. It was no secret the boy admired his cousin and made no secret of the fact when he raised his own sword and yelled the title that brought happy and painful memories in Tsunade's heart. The young dragon. Soon enough, the hall was filled by enthusiastic cheers for the prince and his nickname. Most of the praises came from his own generation, who for all their effort couldn't hide the fact that they saw a chance to step outside of their parents' shadow and earn glory for themselves by following the prince. While Tsunade and her generation could not be so cheerful, as unlike their children they had seen war, and there was no glory in it. Only pain and heartbreak. One which most of the older generation felt clearly when they saw a boy so similar in mind and appearance as their fallen king be accepted as the leader of the next generation. They all could still remember the day, all those years ago, when they proclaimed another man by the same title, and one fact became very clear to their generation. Wars may start and die. Kings may rise and fall. But the young dragon shall live on forever in the hearts of those who yearn for freedom. Madara watched his son, nephew and nieces having a good time alongside children of other ninja lords in the royal gardens. A sight that evoked a smile from his dear friend Hashirama and a worried glance from Tsunade. He's just a boy. They all are, chastised Tsunade. Madara grunted in disapproval while staring at his sister Bailaw seriously. There were many things she was better at than him, most impressively in keeping the prickly and nervous ninja lords united. Not to mention the civilians loved her and she was a shinobi at that. But this was something where she was wrong. They won't be boys forever. It's better they grow up now than in the flames of war, like we all did, rebuked Madara, earning a tired sigh from Hashirama. That is not what we wanted for our children, Madara. We fought and sacrificed so hard to give them a peaceful future, not more wars to fight and die in, said Hashirama bitterly. Both Senjus were disappointed when Madara remained unmoved and stared back at them without backing down, reminding them of the Uchiha stubbornness they had sometimes forgotten due to how far their people lived from each other now. Do you really think he's out there? Asked Tsunade, the hope in her voice not missed by Madara and her brother. I don't have any definite proof, but I believe my brother is too stubborn and honorable to risk his people's fate when he can do something. Those who follow him are of the same heart, including your brothers. I respect them all for their strength and I hope one day I can see them again. In life or death, whispered Madara earnestly. So do I, agreed Hashirama, earning a silent nod from his sister as well. Madara glanced at his nephew currently laughing alongside his son. While his own mother and uncle didn't think him to be strong enough, Madara knew the boy was his father's son and provided the right guidance he would rise up to the responsibility of leading mankind once more. I couldn't protect my brothers, but I will protect them. Even if it costs me everything, promised Madara fiercely. Hashirama was pleased to see the promise Madara had made was not just by looking at his own family but the Senju children and the other clan children as well. The Uchiha Lord was a strong man and sometimes difficult to understand, but he was the best friend Hashirama had ever known. A man who always spoke harsh but honest words. It was why the two Senju siblings couldn't help but reluctantly agree to the Uchiha's next words. "There's a war coming. I don't know how soon, but it is coming," said Madara with a feral grin that sent shivers down the Senju's hearts as they saw the old warrior flare back to life. "It's not a matter of smiling," Madara rebuked Tsunade, and saw her own brother agreed with her sentiment, not that it mattered to the Uchiha who clenched his fist. "How are the Bijou?" he asked seriously, looking directly into Hashirama's eyes intently. Hashirama sighed. "All of them have reformed again. The Kyuubi has so far managed to keep them calm and isolated in the mountains of my lands, but it would be best if they are not called for aid until necessary. Many people still resent them for the destruction and death they caused to humanity in the Otsutsuki War. Even if it was against their will, it doesn't matter for humans or a vengeful race," warned Hashirama, earning a grunt from his best friend. "I don't trust them, but my brother did. The fox promised my brother that he would come to the aid of his son and his descendants when the Otsutsuki clan truly arrived for war. I hope the beast is honest in keeping its promises, or else I'll drag all 9 of them kicking and screaming out of whatever shitty caves they are hiding in," warned Madara, voice grave and dark, which made Tsunade shiver. Fortunately, her brother knew how to deal with his friend better than her. "Let's hope we don't reach that point. In the meantime, you need to keep King Naruto's rinnegan safe. We will only use it in the direst of situations," cautioned Hashirama. It was not much of a promise, but for now it was enough to pacify Madara, who stared back at the vast land of fire around them. He had never been able to take his brother's eye, no matter how powerful that dojutsu was. Some even say it allowed a man to gaze into the future, but Madara had seen enough horrors to be content to live in the present. He only knew that if he had taken his brother's eye, he would have gone mad from grief seeing the world with his brother's eye and remembering how Naruto's life had been sacrificed for the greater good. No, it didn't belong to him, and which was why he had kept it safe to pass on to his brother's son if he required it. He was even willing to limit the use of his own Mangekyo eyes, thereby evading blindness all these years. What was to say? He was a stubborn man. Still another war. We barely survived the last one, and not without severe losses. We might have rebuilt our world and our armies, but we are not at our best. The fighters of our forces are mostly young men and women, led by a quarter of grizzled veteran of old wars. Many warriors chose to retire after the Otsutsuki War, many more after the rebellion. Only the most stubborn, suicidal and craziest have stayed on the path of a shinobi, warned Tsunade, earning a smirk from Madara. "We'll fight with what we have. It's better to have a small group of lions at your side than a horde of sheep," rebuffed Madara nonchalantly, earning a sigh from his best friend. "It's not worth the cost," bemoaned Hashirama, his reluctance and sorrow visible for his friend and sister to witness. Madara steeled himself, ignoring the small bout of fear and hesitation in his own heart as he stared at the next generation, his world and all that he held dear in his hardened heart. "One day we'll crush those pale-eyed bastards. It won't be easy and it won't be without sacrifices, but we can win. Together, we all shall bring fire and blood upon the Otsutsuki clan and burn them all in the fury of mankind," promised Madara with so much conviction that it earned him grim nods from the two seen just beside him. Madara glanced at the skies beyond which the vast universe, and somewhere out there was their eternal foe marching towards them. His words echoing his promise across the universe. One day, the final enemy of mankind shall fall. Explosions thundered all across the destroyed lands. A pale-eyed man with long white hair stepped out of his tent, observing and smiling at the chaos around him. Towards the perimeter of their large settlement, the battle was being fiercely fought between his own forces and the enemy. He gazed far and wide with his pale eyes, only to be surprised by the new enemy before him. They were interesting, to say the least. But his gaze hardened when he saw them use attacks that screamed a mastery over chakra. A power which only belonged to his kind and not the vermin across the universe. The stupid bitch Kaguya had betrayed them, but it was only going to be a minor nuisance in their eternal conquest. Still, it was going to be an interesting challenge in crushing creatures that not just looked similar to his own people, but also were able to mimic their powers at a pitiful level. As the battle raged on, he saw a blonde-haired warrior fiercely lead his small army, shockingly crushing the outermost guard force of the Otsutsuki with ease. On his lips was a simple battle cry that seemed to urge his forces to fight even harder and more fiercely. It also gave the Otsutsuki king a name to his enemy's home. "Earth, huh?"